Chapter 1619, Frightening Aura. Chapter 1619, Frightening Aura. It's dead. The boss is finally dead. The surviving Zero Wing members breathed a sigh of relief as the Purgatory Serpent fell. Originally, they had nearly 700 players on the team, but now, less than 200 remained. Only 6 of the 30 miniature ballistas had survived the fight, as well. Had the raid lasted any longer, the Purgatory Serpent would have likely annihilated them. Fortunately, they secured victory in the end. After the Purgatory Serpent died, the surviving players watched their experience bars rapidly fill. In the blink of an eye, many of them leveled up. Even those that had gained over half of a level. However, these players were more surprised about the loot the Purgatory Serpent had dropped. Although the Grand Lord had not evolved to mythic rank, it had been in the middle of its evolutionary state. Hence, the quality of its loot had improved slightly. Moreover, Shifeng had activated Divine Providence before dealing the final blow. Both factors resulted in the Purgatory Serpent dropping an abundant amount of loot. Overall, the boss had dropped over 80 items, and every one of them glowed with a dazzling light that instantly captured the player's attention. In addition, a towering pillar of light rose for the pile of loot, lasting nearly 5 seconds before it faded. Crap! What kind of loot is that? How can items cause such a phenomenon? Epic rank? No. An epic item wouldn't cause such a commotion. I wonder if it's a rumored legendary rank item. Forget legendary items, I could become so much stronger if I could get my hands on an epic item. My development would skyrocket. Everyone stared at the small mountain of loot, dumbfounded. They were ravaged with curiosity about the items the Grand Lord had dropped. At this point, epic weapons and equipment were the strongest gear the various large guilds had seen in God's domain, but everyone had already seen these items before. They knew that epic items couldn't cause such a phenomenon. The only thing they could think of that would cause something like this was a legendary item. As the light pillar disappeared, the Zero Wing players fought the urge to run towards the loot. They'd have an easy future if they obtained even one epic item, not to mention a legendary item. With a legendary item, they'd never have to worry about daily necessities for the rest of their lives. But despite such thoughts, none of them moved a muscle as they admired the pile of items. Nobody dared to take a single step forward. Even the outsiders, the White Tiger Dojo's disciples, stayed where they stood. First, this was a guild operation, and any items obtained during the operation belonged to the guild. Furthermore, they were internal members, nurtured by the guild. They wouldn't even earn GCPs during this operation, much less items. Secondly, Shifeng had basically killed the Purgatory Serpent by himself. They simply operated the miniature ballistas and helped deal damage. They hadn't contributed in any essential way. Although the White Tiger Dojo's disciples weren't pleased about the outcome, even if they wanted to steal a few items, none of them had the courage to do so with a monstrous player like Shifeng standing beside the pile. Although they had known that Zero Wing's Black Flame was incredibly strong, they hadn't realized exactly how strong before today, but after watching Shifeng dominate a level 70 Grand Lord ranked archaic species by himself, they realized how wide the gap was between them and their leader. Zero Wing's guild leader is inhuman. He sent a monster as powerful and massive as the Purgatory Serpent flying with a single attack. Just how high are his attributes? So, this is Zero Wing's rumored strength? The guild is actually powerful enough to kill a level 70 Grand Lord ranked archaic species at this stage of the game. Even super guilds might not be able to do so. It's no wonder the Hall Master wanted us to train in Zero Wing. If I had 1/3 of that man's standards, I could achieve something great in God's domain. As the White Tiger Dojo's disciples watched Shifeng appraise the loot, their previous contempt for Zero Wing transformed into awe and admiration. Had they encountered such a situation when they had first joined God's domain, they wouldn't have spared a glance at Shifeng's performance, but after playing the game for some time, they realized that God's domain was no ordinary virtual reality game. This game's experts were more impressive than those in other games, especially experts like Shifeng. Although it had seemed as if Shifeng's movements and attacks had been random throughout the battle, every one of his movements had been carefully calculated. Shifeng had constantly guided the Purgatory Serpent during the battle, reducing the risk of the Grand Lord damaging the team as much as possible. Had Shifeng not been there to guide the Purgatory Serpent's attacks, they'd likely be lying on the ground right now. Meanwhile, as Shifeng reached the small mountain of items, he began to collect and appraise the loot. The Purgatory Serpent had dropped a total of 84 items. Among them, 31 were precious epic materials, such as the Purgatory Serpent's skin and scales, 16 potions, 11 Tier 2 magic scrolls, 1 Tier 3 magic scroll, and 3 Tier 2 skill books. All 3 skill books contained considerably rare Tier 2 skills. One offered the Tier 2 skill, Divine Shield, for Guardian Knights, one offered the Tier 2 skill, Fire Snake Dance, for Elementalists, and one contained the Tier 2 skill, Titan's Hand, for Berserkers. Titan's Hand was the rarest of the 3 skills, one which all Berserkers dreamed of wielding. The skill was neither a damage skill nor did it over some heaven-defying defensive ability. Instead, it allowed players to wield 2 two-handed weapons for a short time, significantly improving Berserkers' DPS and combat abilities. An additional weapon also meant an additional boost to a player's attributes. Moreover, wielding 2 weapons allowed players to use more complex attack patterns. In addition, Berserkers didn't have to worry about a lack of strength in their attacks like dual-wielding swordsmen due to the nature of two-handed weapons. Hence, Titan's Hand was a highly sought-after skill for Berserkers. In fact, the skill's market value was on par with Tier 3 skills. Of the remaining loot, there were 9 pieces of level 60 secret silver equipment, 4 pieces of level 60 fine gold equipment, 2 pieces of level 60 dark gold equipment, 1 pair of epic ranked cloth shoes, 2 mana stones, 1 engineering design, 1 alchemy recipe, and 1 forging design. The last item, however, was a blood red stone engraved with glowing, golden divine runes. Sure enough, the Demon Mineral Field's guardian boss was quite extraordinary. Shifeng was clearly ecstatic when he saw the blood red stone. Even he had wondered what kind of item would cause such a phenomenon, releasing such a powerful aura. But even after appraising most of the loot, he hadn't found any particularly special items. The most powerful item was the epic ranked cloth shoes, but no epic item could cause such a dazzling event. Upon appraising the blood red stone, however, Shifeng realized that this stone had been the cause of the commotion. The stone was none other than the bloodline every player in God's domain dreamed of obtaining. However, this bloodline wasn't like those he had obtained in the past. The dark iron bloodline he had obtained during his visit to the divine staircase had been personally crafted by a god, but the bloodline in his hand had formed naturally. Hence, it had taken the form of a stone rather than a gentle liquid. Chapter 1620, Natural Bloodline. Chapter 1620, Natural Bloodline. What's up with the guild leader? Why is he staring at that blood-red stone? Is there something special about it? What's so special about a stone? It's just raw material. I wonder what kind of equipment the Purgatory Serpent dropped. It'd be insane if it dropped a piece of legendary equipment. Don't be crazy. No matter how you look at it, a Grand Lord will never drop a legendary item. Though, it might have a high chance of dropping a fragmented legendary item. If our guild obtains a fragmented legendary item, the super guilds will go mad with jealousy. The players from Zero Wing launched into a discussion about the Purgatory Serpent's loot, growing particularly excited as they talked about the possibility of a fragmented legendary item dropping. Players in the various large guilds had begun to reach level 50, and some of the guilds had already obtained a few epic items. However, no one had heard of a guild obtaining a fragmented legendary item. If Zero Wing found a fragmented legendary item, it would become the guild's prized treasure, serving as a symbol of the guild's strength. Such an item would definitely elevate the guild's reputation since it would be the first guild in God's domain to possess such an item. Almost everyone who played virtual reality games paid attention to weapons and equipment. Apex weapons and equipment, in particular, were highly sought after. If news spread of Zero Wing's procurement of a fragmented legendary item, even players in other kingdoms and empires would learn of their guild, much less Star Moon Kingdom's players. A flood of players would visit their guild residences to join Zero Wing, making it much easier for the guild to recruit experts and continue to increase its strength. A fragmented legendary item? Shi Feng could not help but chuckle when he overheard the hushed conversations. Zero Wing had acquired fragmented legendary items long ago, and the guild actually had more than one. Although they were correct that a fragmented legendary item could improve Zero Wing's reputation, great wealth brought great misfortune. Although the guild's fame would skyrocket if the public knew that Zero Wing possessed fragmented legendary items, it would also earn the guild an endless number of enemies. Hence, he had forbidden the guild's upper echelon speaking about these items to the public. Moreover, the blood-red stone in his hand was far more valuable than a fragmented legendary item. Bloodlines were extremely rare in God's domain, even rarer than fragmented legendary items. When a bloodline was found, even super guilds would use every weapon in their arsenal to obtain it, and the resulting bloodbaths would be horrendous. Obtaining a bloodline increased a guild's chance of nurturing an apex expert. Moreover, as players reached higher levels, the bloodline's benefits would become more prominent. After a certain level, these benefits would even surpass those of a fragmented legendary item. Furthermore, the stone in his hand was a naturally occurring bloodline, not an artificial bloodline crafted by ancient gods. There were two types of bloodlines in God's domain. The first type included the ancient gods' creations, the main bloodline source in God's domain. The second type involved naturally occurring bloodlines. The first type formed by drawing on the ancient gods' power, and in terms of potential, these bloodlines were slightly weaker than their natural counterparts. Regardless, both types of bloodline had their own advantages. Those created by the ancient gods catered to specific aspects. For example, Shi Feng's Dark Iron bloodline improved his compatibility with melee skills, helping him increase his skill compatibility rates. On the other hand, natural bloodlines weren't as specialized, but in return, they provided greater boons to basic attributes. Due to the nature of these bloodlines, players who used them were generally known as humanoid monsters. To players who wanted to push the limits of their basic attributes, natural bloodlines were invaluable. Shi Feng couldn't believe he had actually obtained a natural bloodline from killing a level 70 Grand Lord. Even though it had been an archaic species, it shouldn't have had a chance of dropping one, yet it had. If the demon players in the World Summit found out about this, they'd die of envy. Despite the various demon players trying desperately to ascend the divine staircase, they struggled to earn enough shrine points to purchase a bloodline, yet Shi Feng had obtained one after killing a single monster. Moreover, the raid had been relatively easy, with one boss and no mobs. Moreover, this stone was top tier among basic bloodlines. It was called the Shadow Bloodline. Shadow Bloodline. Weakens presence and aura significantly. Effects double when in darkness. Improvements focus on agility, followed by strength, endurance, intelligence, and vitality. Although the Shadow Bloodline's benefits to a player's combat power weren't as apparent as the ancient gods' bloodlines, it would undoubtedly increase an assassin or ranger's survivability. Decreasing one's presence and aura wasn't just effective against other players, but monsters would also struggle to notice the player. Rangers and assassins with the Shadow Bloodline would be able to explore high-level maps with ease, and they could enter places that players normally avoided. They could enter places that players normally could not set foot into. The Shadow Bloodline alone was more valuable than the Purgatory Serpent's combined loot. This trip was definitely worth it. Shi Feng could not help but smile at the Shadow Bloodline. Neither epic equipment nor precious tools could help nurture a true apex expert, but the Shadow Bloodline could. In fact, it might even help a player become a Tier 6 God-ranked expert. Even if he gave the Shadow Bloodline to an ordinary assassin or ranger in the guild, he could instantly nurture an astonishingly powerful expert, let alone experts like Fire Dance. When Shi Feng finally finished admiring the Shadow Bloodline, he stored it in his bag. He had no intention of informing the others about the item. After he finished with the remaining loot, he instructed his team to rest up and prepare to enter the town. No one gave Shi Feng's decision much thought. They simply did as they were told while the healers resurrected the dead. Meanwhile, the magic barrier around the town had vanished after the Purgatory Serpent's death. Players could now enter the town without hindrance. Of course, chaos ensued in the town. The demon kin, who had been mining the ores, ran around in a panic while the demon supervisors angrily suppressed the undisciplined demon kin. Demon kin, demonic creature, chieftain. Level 70. HP 9000000/9000000. Demon supervisor, demonic creature, great lord. Level 72. HP 38, 500, 000/38, 500, 000. To Shi Feng, this chaos was an opportunity. There were easily more than 10,000 monsters in the town, and if they moved like an organized army, capturing the town's mineral field would likely be impossible. However, he could take advantage of the fight between the demon kin and the demon supervisors, slowly clearing out the monsters in the town. Shi Feng didn't hurry to enter the town after his slain team members resurrected. Instead, he activated a spatial gate and sent them out of the boneless land to rest and recover. His team's stamina and concentration had almost depleted during the previous battle, and there was no doubt that they were in for a long, arduous battle once they entered the town. They had to recover their stamina and concentration first. Time passed quickly. Once everyone had recovered, Shi Feng led them back to the town's perimeter. Everyone, get ready. Once my great lords secure the monster's aggro, you'll attack with the remaining miniature ballistas. Do not let any of the demon kin or demon supervisors get close. Shi Feng ordered. He then took a deep breath before pushing open the town's steel gates. The instant Shi Feng entered the town, a horrific killing intent washed over him, shocking him awake. A series of system notifications then bombarded his ears. Chapter 1621, Lost Town. Chapter 1621, Lost Town. When the demon town's rune-covered gates opened, it felt as if some seal on the town had been removed as a chilling aura of killing intent surged out of the town's gate. What kind of town is this? Why does it have such a powerful aura? Crap. My attributes are decreasing. As the players from the White Tiger Dojo and Zero Wing prepared for battle some distance away, they couldn't help but shudder the moment Shi Feng opened the gates. There was a massive difference between the aura they felt as the gates opened and the aura they had felt while looking at the demon town from the distant hillside. If the aura they had felt before was air, the aura they felt now was as heavy and dense as seawater. Not only did the powerful aura bring with it an intense mental pressure, making it hard for them to think, but their attributes had also begun to spiral downward. In the blink of an eye, their basic attributes had decreased by 30%. Shi Feng, who had already entered the town, wasn't surprised by the sudden change. However, he was surprised by the system notifications he had received. System, congratulations. You have discovered a lost town. System, congratulations. You have triggered the epic ranked main storyline quest, Demon's Nest. System, do you wish to accept this quest? If you abandon this quest, the lost town will disappear due to its broken seal. You have 1 hour to consider. If you do not make a decision within the hour, the quest will automatically be abandoned. Why is there a lost town here? Shi Feng looked at the system notifications in confusion. Aside from its kingdoms, empires, and neutral towns and cities, God's domain had towns that had been left behind by ancient civilizations. Unfortunately, these towns didn't have official names since their history had been lost, leaving them with the title of Lost Town. Lost towns weren't like ordinary towns. All of the lost towns contained power and abilities, which other towns didn't have, that their ancient civilization had left behind. These abilities had different levels of strength. Some could even help a first-rate guild develop into a super first-rate guild in a short amount of time, although even lost towns with weaker abilities could tempt a superpower into action. This was due to the ability's unique nature in God's domain. In the past, many wars had been waged between God's domain's superpowers over these lost towns. There had even been one instance involving over 10 superpowers. Shifeng had never expected to find a lost town in the Boneless Land. The mineral field was nothing compared to the town itself. It's no wonder why I hadn't heard of a town in the Boneless Land in the past. This restriction is likely the reason that no one ever found it. Shifeng could not help but smile bitterly at the system notification. Regardless of how powerful a lost town was, they were all incredibly difficult to claim. There was no turning back if one missed the opportunity. Once a lost town disappeared, it was gone forever. The players that had found the Boneless Land's lost town had likely failed the quest, causing its disappearance. If that were the case, it was only natural that no one had ever heard of it. Of course, Shifeng accepted the quest. Although he did not know what this lost town's function was, Zero Wing would miss out on a golden opportunity to grow stronger if he abandoned it. System, congratulations. You have accepted the epic ranked main storyline quest, Demon's Nest. Quest content, you are required to collect 100 darkness stones to reseal the anchor within 10 natural days. If you fail to do so, the Demon King of a specific planar world will hunt you endlessly. You will also permanently lose 100 points from all attributes and 10 levels. Quest reward unknown. Crap. Shifeng nearly spat blood when he read the quest content. He finally understood why the players who had discovered the Boneless Land's lost town had failed the quest to acquire it. This quest was beyond difficult. It was a joke. Darkness stones were like mana stones. They contained a frightening amount of power of darkness, which demon players could use to improve the power of darkness within. In the past, demon players had even spent up to 500 gold per darkness stone. Yet, this quest required him to gather 100 darkness stones within 10 natural days. This quest was asking for the impossible. Darkness stones were immensely rare, and normally, on mythic ranked dark creatures had a chance of dropping them. Even if he were extremely lucky, and every mythic dark creature he killed dropped one, he'd still have to kill 100 of them. With his current standards, killing one mythic dark creature would be impossible, let alone 100. Not even super guilds could accomplish such a feat. Mythic monsters weren't easy to find, and mythic ranked dark creatures were an even rarer sight. Hunting down 100 mythic ranked dark creatures in 10 days would be nearly impossible. When Shifeng saw the penalty for failing the quest, he was speechless. The penalty was extraordinarily ruthless. While he could accept losing 10 levels and 100 points in every attribute, dealing with a Tier 5 Demon King's tenacious hunt was no laughing matter. Meanwhile, he wasn't nearly powerful enough to kill a Demon King. Every Demon King had the power to engulf a kingdom in flames. Even Tier 4 players would be little more than ants before a Tier 5 Demon King, much less a Tier 2 player like Shifeng. Guild leader, has something happened? Zero Wing's members asked curiously when they realized that Shifeng hadn't moved for some time. Forget it. Let's just secure the town and get the mana Oregon. Shifeng shook his head to clear his mind. There was no point in pondering the quest since he didn't have a solution for obtaining the 100 darkness stones. Following which, he commanded, everyone, prepare for battle. As Shifeng gave the command, the team members began to push the miniature ballistas forward, following after their leader. At the same time, Shifeng controlled his 4 remaining Great Lords to lure some of the battling Demon Kin and Demon Supervisors. Unlike the players, whose basic attributes had been suppressed when the town's gates had opened, the demonic creatures within were unaffected. Fortunately, Shifeng had the Bible of Darkness, and with the Demon Ruler's suppression, dealing with the Chieftain-ranked Demon King and Great Lord-ranked Demon Supervisors became easy. After Shifeng's Great Lords gathered some demonic creatures, Shifeng activated Flame Domain while Zero Wing's members attacked with the remaining siege weapons. After around 20 minutes, the team had cleared out a wave of Demon Kin and Demon Supervisors. When the monsters died, the players' experience bars rose by a sizable chunk. However, these monsters granted considerably less EXP than the demonic creatures they had killed outside of the town. In fact, they had awarded even less EXP than ordinary monsters of the same rank and level. Even so, these players' leveling speed was multiple times faster than peak experts. As for the Demonkin and Demon Supervisor's loot, it simply couldn't compare to the loot the demonic creatures had dropped. Despite killing over 100 Demonkin and several Demon Supervisors, the team had only obtained 6 pieces of bronze equipment and 1 piece of mysterious iron equipment. As Shurfeng collected the loot, however, he discovered several black crystals beside the demonic monsters' corpses. What? This is mana ore. Shurfeng had nearly thought his eyes had played a trick on him when he saw the black crystals on the ground. Everyone in God's domain knew that the monsters didn't drop mana ore, but it was nearly impossible that Shurfeng, who was both a master forger and extremely familiar with the metal, would mistake the item. After carefully examining the corpses, Shurfeng found 17 ingots of mana ore, over 100 ingots of ancient bronze ore, and 3 ingots of Eternium Oregon. Even if one mined an ancient bronze vein, they likely wouldn't obtain a single ingot for every 30 ingots of ancient bronze Oregon. And players would be very lucky to gain a single ingot of Eternium ore for every 100 ingots of ancient bronze ore, yet Shurfeng had obtained so much after killing a few Demonkin and Demon Supervisors. This was inconceivable. Chapter 1622, Struggle over the Primordial Divine Ruin. Chapter 1622, Struggle over the Primordial Divine Ruin. Shurfeng wasn't the only player surprised to discover that the Demonkin and Demon Supervisors dropped mana Oregon. Hey, do those rocks look like mana ore to you? Pmichum. I've seen mana ore before. They should be mana ore. Isn't mana ore a rare drop when mining? I never knew that monsters dropped it, too. None of these players was a stranger to mana Oregon. Due to the disturbance the Orc Empire had caused, the kingdoms and empires neighboring the Orc Empire had activated a contribution system that allowed players to purchase precious items. The contribution system had also lured many players towards the Orc Empire. If players wanted to ease the task of killing the Empire's orcs, the mana charm, crafted with mana ore, was a must-have. Currently, mana ore sold for 1 gold, 20 silver per piece. Moreover, this price continued to rise, yet their team had obtained over a dozen pieces of mana ore after killing 1 demonic creature group. They had just made over 20 gold in profit, and this included the cost of repairing their weapons and equipment. Even expert players were fortunate to earn 1 gold a day. Furthermore, the various large guilds currently viewed mana ore as a strategic item. With so many people eyeing the ore, it was hard to purchase even if one could afford the cost. And their profit would be even greater if they used all of the mana ore to craft mana charms. The mana charm was a consumable item, and one could craft 10 charms with a single piece of mana Oregon. Currently, mana charms sold for 20 silver each. Alright, we're moving on to the next wave. After Shurfeng collected the loot, he had his monsters lure another wave of demonic creatures. In the previous fight, Shurfeng had taken control of a demon supervisor, and he had 5 great lords under his command once more, making it much easier to defeat the next wave of demonkin and demon supervisors. With the 5 great lord tanks, Shurfeng's flame domain and various AoE skills, and Zero Wings members attacking with the miniature ballistas, the team steadily and swiftly eliminated one wave of demonic creatures after another. Although the battles were monotonous and boring, these players brimmed with excitement throughout the grind. With each wave of demonkin and demon supervisors they killed, they earned between 10 and 20 pieces of mana ore and 3 to 5 pieces of Eternium Oregon. The team had also become more efficient as they worked. It had initially taken them 20+ minutes to annihilate each wave, and now, they cleared the monsters in a little over 10 minutes. With the abundant EXP, the team's leveling speed was also astonishingly fast. After grinding for a little over a day, Shurfeng and his players finally reached the town's inner area. At this point, these players had leveled significantly. Now, even the lowest level player was level 45, whereas the highest level player was level 47. They had nearly caught up with Zero Wings elite members. Meanwhile, to improve their efficiency, Shi Feng had invested the EXP he had acquired into the Aura of Fire's flame domain. Now, the skill dealt 2400% base damage every second for 8 seconds, rather than the previous 1800% every second for 7 seconds. The damage per second upscale had also risen from 20% to 25%, and the skill now covered a 100-yard radius. The skill could basically rival super large-scale destruction spells. Unfortunately, its cooldown was still 5 minutes. Meanwhile, after more than a day of grinding, Shi Feng had acquired a total of 4,526 pieces of mana ore and 913 pieces of Eternium Oregon. The monsters had actually dropped more mana ore than what Zero Wing had in its warehouse by a considerable margin. While Shi Feng massacred Demon Kin and Demon Supervisors, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had kept him updated with several situation reports. Their reports mainly focused on the primordial divine ruin in the Orc Empire. The various large guilds had fought tooth and nail over the ruin after its sudden appearance. They all wanted the level 50 top-tier weapons and equipment as well as the rumored advanced combat techniques to prepare for the level 50 super large-scale team dungeons. Currently, 2 super first-rate guilds and 2 super guilds were involved in the struggle. Even a transcendental power like the Secret Pavilion, which rarely took part in such struggles, had joined the fray. Naturally, plenty of first-rate guilds joined the fight, as well. The situation at the ruin was utter chaos. Meanwhile, only 10,000 players were allowed into the primordial divine ruin each day, but over 1 million players had gathered in the area, with the weakest on par with the guild elite members. The war over the primordial divine ruin was the most intense in God's domain thus far. Over 30,000 expert players had already died, not to mention the elite players. When the ruin had last activated, the 5 superpowers had claimed 70% of the available slots. Surprisingly, Heaven's Burial had secured 1/3 of the remaining 30%. The various first-rate guilds had shared the remaining 20%, and none of the second- and third-rate guilds had claimed a single slot. Guild Leader, although Heaven's Burial has suffered significant casualties while it explored the primordial divine ruin, they've also obtained plenty of level 50 fine gold and dark gold weapons and equipment. Their top-tier experts' combat power has improved massively. I've also heard that they've obtained 2 basic combat techniques and plenty of magic array scrolls, designs, and recipes. Although our guild has suffered about the same losses as Heaven's Burial in the field battles, I'm afraid that we'll be in danger soon if Heaven's Burial continues to grow stronger. Why don't we send some of our members to explore the ruin as well? Aqua Rose was sorely tempted to loot the primordial divine ruin. Although the Conqueror parties slaughtered Heaven's Burial's members, Heaven's Burial and Blackwater weren't simple enemies. To counter the Conqueror parties, the 2 guilds had employed many Refinement Realm experts, sending them out to ambush Zero Wing's members in the 4 high-resource maps. They had even sent some of these Refinement Realm experts to ambush the Conqueror parties. Meanwhile, both guilds had suffered tremendous losses. If Zero Wing hadn't partnered with several first-rate guilds and raked in a massive profit with Zero Wing City's teleportation function, the guild would have crumbled long ago. How is the equipment collection coming along? Shi Feng asked. We've only collected a small fraction of the required amount thus far. I'm afraid that it'll take some time before we have 700 full sets of level 50 weapons and equipment, Aqua Rose said, sighing powerlessly. The guild's consumption of weapons and equipment was severely high right now. Trying to set aside level 50 elite weapons and equipment for 700 players under such circumstances was incredibly difficult. She had even involved Gentle Snow's main force in the task. Disregard the primordial divine ruin for now and focus on collecting weapons and equipment. Once we have the items ready, we'll have an easier time dealing with the guild's issues, Shi Feng instructed. I'll think of a way to gather as much as possible. Aqua Rose could only nod in frustration. She had to admit that Zero Wing's foundations were significantly weaker than Heaven's Burial. The difference between the guild's expert count and capital was like heaven and earth. Even the Conqueror parties only helped reduce the massive gap slightly. An additional 700 experts would definitely help ease the pressure on the guild. After Aqua Rose disconnected the call, Shifeng led his team deeper into the town's inner area. The inner area had far fewer monsters than the town's outer area, although the weakest here were level 70 Lord-ranked Demonkin warriors. The Chieftain-ranked Demonkin were nowhere to be seen. In addition, there were plenty of level 72 Great Lord-ranked Demon Supervisors and level 74 Grand Lord-ranked Demon Overseers roaming about. Even with 5 Great Lords under his command, Shifeng did not move casually. He needed a strategic position before he took action. Guild leader discovered a tower behind a magic barrier, one of the assassins sent to scout the town reported. Stuttering, the assassin continued, I also spotted a large treasure chest made entirely of magic crystals. Chapter 1623, Town's Ability. Chapter 1623, Town's Ability. A treasure chest made of magic crystals. A light flashed in everyone's eyes when they heard the assassin's report. In God's domain, treasure chests were reward opportunities that players frequently encountered. One could gain even higher quality loot from a treasure chest, depending on its rank, than from powerful monsters. Normally, treasure chests were either made of wood or metal. This was even the case for dark gold treasure chests. Making a treasure chest with magic crystals was just extravagant. Needless to say, the treasure chest definitely wasn't low rank. A bronze treasure chest's loot could already rival a chieftain-ranked monster's drops of the same level, not to mention mysterious iron, secret silver, fine gold and dark gold treasure chests. Moreover, as players explored higher-level maps, each map would contain fewer treasure chests. Even bronze treasure chests were exceedingly rare in maps above level 50. The treasure chest's loot was part of the reason for this. Rather than containing loot on par with the drops from a chieftain-ranked monster of the same level, a bronze treasure chest would contain items on par with a lord-ranked monster of the same level in level 50+ maps. Magic crystals. Shock gripped Shifeng's heart when he heard the assassin's report. Immediately, he demanded, what color are the runes on the chest? God's domain had many different kinds of treasure chests, and although the most common were made of wood or metal, not all items in the game could be stored in wood or metal treasure chests. Certain special items needed to be stored in high mana density environments. For these items, the system used chests made from magic crystals. Such treasure chests were insanely rare in God's domain, and naturally, they were far more valuable than ordinary chests. All of the items in such chests were unique in God's domain, there were no duplicates of these items. These magic crystal treasure chests also had a different ranking system than ordinary treasure chests. Their ranks were based on the color of the runes engraved on the crystal. The runes came in silver, gold, and purple. Silver was at the bottom of the list, while purple runes offered the best items. Gold, the assassin answered after taking a closer look. Gold. Shifeng was instantly ecstatic. Alright, we'll head over right away. In God's domain, a silver magic crystal treasure chest was the equivalent of a fine gold or dark gold treasure chest, a gold magic crystal treasure chest was on par with an epic treasure chest, and a purple magic crystal treasure chest was the equivalent of an inferior legendary treasure chest or higher. Shifeng had only ever seen silver magic crystal treasure chests in the past, never gold, but he had heard rumors that Chaos Star, one of God's domain's 12 sacred elementalists, had opened a gold magic crystal treasure chest. This was also precisely the reason that he had secured his position as one of the 12 sacred elementalists. Moreover, unlike the other 11, who had been replaced from time to time, Chaos Star had held his position. Unfortunately, nobody knew what he had obtained from the gold magic crystal treasure chest. Shifeng and the rest of his team quickly arrived before the White Tower. The tower was only 5 stories tall, and a pitch-black pearl that radiated a frightening aura occupied the tip of the tower. When this aura washed over the team, they felt as if some monster was watching them. Even the mana around the pitch-black pearl seemed frozen. There was no flow of mana around the pearl whatsoever. Numerous divine runes had been carved along the tower's walls, and they created a light blue defensive barrier around the tower, which seemed impenetrable. However, unlike most people, Shifeng knew that the barrier wasn't an ordinary defensive magic array. The magic array carved into the tower's walls had survived since ancient times. Current magic arrays simply couldn't compare. Moreover, based on the array's complexity, Shifeng guessed that it was beyond a master magic array. Not even a Tier 4 existence would be able to scratch the barrier, forced to stand aside as they gazed at it. Interestingly, no monsters were anywhere near the tower. The roaming demon supervisors and demonkin warriors only stared at it for a moment before moving on. None of the demonic creatures dared to come within 100 yards of the White Tower. Meanwhile, placed on the tower's open-air top floor sat a magic crystal treasure chest, and as the assassin had reported, the treasure chest was covered in golden runes. The treasure chest also radiated so much mana that it created a white mist around it. Seeing this phenomenon, even a fool would realize that the chest was far from ordinary. All of the players on Shifeng's team drooled as they stared at the treasure chest. "Everyone, get ready. We'll eliminate the surrounding monsters first," Shifeng immediately commanded. Although he did not know why none of the monsters would approach the tower, there were still over 500 of them in the area. If they did not clear out the monsters, they'd never approach the tower without detection. Following which, Shifeng controlled his 5 great lords and began to lure the demon supervisors and demonkin warriors, killing the demonic creatures with practiced organization. With the help of Demon Ruler, Shifeng's great lords could tank around 20 demon supervisors and demonkin warriors simultaneously. After gathering the enemy demonic creatures, Shifeng used Flame Domain, and towering flames devoured the monsters, dealing several 100,000 damage each second. At this point, Flame Domain was far stronger than Tier 2 spells. In fact, it almost surpassed Tier 3 large-scale destruction spells. By the time Flame Domain ended, the demon supervisors and demonkin warriors had lost nearly 4 million HP each. Immediately following, a volley of exploding arrows slammed into the demonic creatures, each arrow dealing around -300,000 damage. The demon supervisors and demonkin warriors very quickly became EXP for Shifeng's team. By the time the group defeated the 500 or so demonic creatures around the tower, some of the level 45 players had risen to level 46. However, the level 47 players still needed some time before they reached level 48. As for the loot, the team gained far more than the drops in the town's outer area. More than 100 level 60+ weapons and equipment had dropped, and among them, over 30 were mysterious iron rank. In addition, plenty of mana ore had dropped. Killing the 500+ monsters had netted Shifeng nearly 1,000 pieces of mana ore, increasing the total count past 5,000. With this, we should have more than enough mana ore to construct the mana tower. Shifeng could not help but smile in satisfaction as he gazed at the mana ore in his bag. The trip to the Boneless Land had definitely been worthwhile. The mana tower was one of the most important support buildings a guild city could have. It was the defining point between a guild city and a guild town. Normally, guilds constructed their mana tower the moment they acquired a city, but due to the sudden demand for mana ore, Zero Wing City hadn't had enough to construct its mana tower until now. It hadn't been able to become a true guild city. Now that he had enough mana ore, he could start constructing Zero Wing City's mana tower once he returned. After dealing with the surrounding monsters, Zero Wing's members approached the tower. However, the instant they set foot within 100 yards of the tower, the black pearl at its tip began to glow with energy. It then fired countless beams of black light at the approaching crowd. Caught off guard, the beams struck Zero Wing's members. Not only were they thrown out of the 100-yard perimeter, but they had also lost 20% of their HPs. Although some experts, like Zipping, had reacted quickly and defended themselves with their weapons, the impact still forced them to retreat by 3 steps. On the bright side, they hadn't received any damage. After the first wave of black beams, only 100 or so players remained within 100 yards of the tower. The rest of the team had been thrown back. An instant later, the pitch-black pearl launched another wave of beam attacks. This time, the more beams targeted each player. During the first wave, each player only had to deal with 3 beams, but now, they had to face 4. Furthermore, each player had to deal with an additional beam each time the Black Pearl attacked. The longer the crowd remained inside the 100-yard range, the fiercer the attacks became. When the Black Pearl launched more than 10 beams at each player, even the experts of Yu-zipping standards were thrown out of range. It's no wonder why the monsters avoided the tower. This defensive feature is really amazing. Realization dawned on Shifeng as he watched his teammates fly backward. At the same time, he was overwhelmed by ecstasy. Every lost town had its own unique ability in God's domain. Clearly, this defensive feature was this lost town's ability. Although Shifeng had only watched the defensive feature for a few moments, he had grasped the feature's true purpose. In reality, the defensive feature wasn't meant to keep enemies away. Rather, it was a training device to help players improve their combat standards. This was an extremely rare ability, even among God's domain's various lost towns. Chapter 1624, Gap. Chapter 1624, Gap. Despite multiple attempts to approach the tower, none of Zero Wing and White Tiger Dojo's members got within 70 yards before they were thrown out of the 100-yard range. What a powerful trap. Crap. The system is definitely doing this on purpose. It put that treasure chest on display up there just to taunt us. This is ridiculous. It's impossible to take on more than 10 of those black beams at once with the silencing effect within the tower's 100-yard range. Those beams are so fast, too. Everyone looked at the pitch-black pearl on the tip of the tower with resentment. They felt that the system was toying with them. Among their nearly 700 players, Yu-zipping had the best performance. However, even Yu-zipping had only reached the 72-yard mark before being blasted out by over a dozen black beams. Yu-zipping's combat standards easily ranked among the top players in their group, yet not even he could reach the tower. When they thought about how they might have to leave the magic crystal treasure chest on the tower's top floor, anger and frustration tore at their hearts. These kids really take things for granted. Shifeng, who had remained motionless, shook his head and laughed when he overheard his team members grumbling. Following which, he started to make his way towards the tower. As Shifeng approached the tower, everyone turned their gazes towards him. Guild leader Black Flame is going to try to reach the tower, too. With his level of skill, I wonder how far he'll get. This trap is too difficult. Although guild leader Black Flame is superbly strong, I doubt that he'll get past the 50-yard mark. I'm not so sure about that. We already had to face over a dozen beams before we even reached the 70-yard mark. At the 50-plus range, I bet that the tower will fire over 30 beams. Even if guild leader Black Flame has frightening attributes, dealing with so many attacks should be impossible. I don't think he'll even get past the 60-yard mark. As the White Tiger Dojo crowd watched Shifeng approach the tower, they started a quiet discussion amongst themselves. They were curious to see the capabilities of Star Moon Kingdom's mythical expert. Truthfully, they had been displeased when the White Tiger Dojo had sent them to train with Zero Wing. They were bona fide fighting experts in the real world, yet they were training under a virtual expert. This was a joke. However, after spending some time in God's domain, they had discovered that this virtual reality game was far from ordinary. Many techniques that were impossible to perform in the real world could be easily accomplished in God's domain. This superhuman combat method was truly addictive. After training with Zero Wing and fighting other players in Zero Wing's battle arena, they came to realize how massive the gap between their abilities and veteran players was. Although they hadn't been a match for God's domain's veteran players initially, however, they had grown strong enough to stand against expert players in Stone Forest Town's battle arena. They now acutely understood God's domain's combat method. Hence, they realized just how powerful Shifeng was. After all, they had watched plenty of experts' battle videos before, including recordings of Shifeng's past battles. In those battles, Shifeng could definitely be described as a monster. After watching Shifeng's battles, they had begun to admire the man. However, the tower's defensive feature tested one's combat standard, basic attributes had very little to do with it. It didn't matter if Shifeng's attributes were significantly higher than theirs, and although his combat standards were awesome, he should still have his limits. The guild leader is making a move personally. Nice. We're in for a treat now. In contrast to the White Tiger Dojo disciples' skepticism, Zero Wings members were clearly excited. They paid close attention to Shifeng's every move, hoping to get a glimpse of his true strength. Normally, they didn't get to see this, and in the previous battles, Shifeng had mostly relied on his 5 great lords. They barely caught a glimpse of Shifeng's true capabilities. Experts like Yuziping watched Shifeng curiously, as well. They were all eager to learn how much of a gap existed between them and their guild leader. Shifeng quickly arrived at the 100-yard mark, but unexpectedly, he didn't sprint towards the towers as the previous players had. Instead, he continued leisurely even once he was within the Black Pearl's attack range. What is the guild leader trying to do? Could he be testing the waters? Shifeng's actions confused his team members. They had already gotten a clear grasp of the Black Pearl's attack method during their previous attempts. Not only did the strength of Black Pearl's attacks increase as they moved closer to the tower, but it also launched attacks more frequently. If someone wanted a better chance of reaching the tower, they needed to move quickly. They also needed to block the orb's attacks. Yet, Shifeng was. Before anyone could react, the Black Pearl began to attack Shifeng. Suddenly, 2 beams of light shot towards Shifeng's vital points. Just when the 2 beams were about to hit, Shifeng stopped abruptly and turned slightly. He didn't bother to unsheath either the Abyssal Blade or Killing Ray. Shio! Shio! Everyone watched, disappointed, as the 2 beams pierced their guild leader. However, the attacks didn't throw Shifeng out of the 100-yard area, and he began to pace towards the tower once more. What's going on? Did he dodge them? The player's expression twisted with confusion. Following which, the Black Pearl launched another wave of attacks. This time, it fired 3 beams. As Shifeng moved closer to the tower, the beams reached Shifeng much sooner than the last attacks had, giving their target less time to react. The team members watched Shifeng with wide-eyed anticipation. What was the man going to do this time? However, to their disappointment, Shifeng reacted the same way as before, stopping and shifting to the side. Like the prior attacks, the beams passed through his body harmlessly, striking the ground behind him. Shifeng continuously moved closer towards the tower like so. 95 yards. 90 yards. 80 yards. The beams, which had beaten everyone senseless, were practically non-existent to Shifeng. They pierced through him harmlessly, again and again, blasting small craters into the ground behind him. Shifeng quickly reached the 72-yard mark, Yuziping's record distance. However, he hadn't even used his weapons to defend himself once since he began his approach. In fact, he hadn't even touched his weapons. Is the Black Pearl broken? Has the system made some mistake? The White Tiger Dojo disciples gaped in shock as they watched Shifeng steadily move closer towards the tower as if he were strolling across his backyard. In their opinion, Shifeng hadn't done anything whatsoever all this time. The only explanation they could think of was that the system had made an error. They had never thought that Shifeng would be so lucky. Seeing this, some curious White Tiger Dojo disciples decided to attempt the test again. However, when they allowed the black beams to strike, they were instantly thrown backward. Impossible. How is the guild leader doing it? Why aren't the Black Pearl's attacks hitting him? The White Tiger Dojo spectators' eyes fall from their sockets as they watched as their companions were blasted past the 100-yard mark. So, this is the difference between the guild leader and me? Yuziping revealed a bitter smile as he watched Shifeng move past the 50-yard mark. Although he had been aware of the huge gap between him and Zero Wing's peak experts, he hadn't realized that the gap between them was so fast, let alone the difference between his abilities and that of Zero Wing's mythical expert. In less than a minute, Shifeng had reached the base of the tower, at which point the tower's defensive magic array deactivated. Chapter 1625, Jackpot. Chapter 1625, Jackpot. As the White Tower's defensive magic array transformed into particles of light and vanished, time seemed to have frozen around the tower. Both Zero Wings members and the White Tiger Dojo's disciples stared with blank faces. He passed it. Am I dreaming? He didn't even use his weapons. Yes. That must be it. We must be dreaming. How could such a thing even be possible? No player could dodge that many attacks. Could Guild Leader Black Flame actually be an NPC in disguise? For a time, the players shared their guesses about Shifeng. They simply couldn't wrap their minds around what had just happened. They hadn't even made it to the 70-yard mark before they had been sent flying back to the starting point, yet Shifeng had walked through the area as if strolling through his backyard. Even when he had neared the 50-yard mark and faced over 30 beams, he slowly and steadily continued forward. Regardless of how fast the pitch-black pearl's attack rate had become, Shifeng's speed was unaffected. When Shifeng crossed the 50-yard mark, the beams had changed their attack trajectories in the middle of the attacks. After reaching the 30-yard mark, they had even begun to curve to attack Shifeng from the sides and rear. Zero Wing and White Tiger Dojo's members had watched the attacks in anguish. Not only did players have to worry about the Black Pearl changing its attack trajectories, but they also had to worry about attacks from their sides and behind them. Moreover, every attack struck simultaneously. Blocking the attacks from a single direction was already impossible, not to mention dodging or blocking every one of them. The creepier thing was that the pitch-black pearl seemed to fear Shifeng. While Shifeng had made his way towards the tower, every one of the pearl's beam attacks had avoided him. This was already far beyond everything they knew of God's domain. When the White Tiger Dojo disciples watched Shifeng, a chill crawled down their spines. Aside from their reverence, they were afraid and excited to learn more about a realm they had never discovered before. Although not everyone was willing to acknowledge that Shifeng had cleared the test, there was no doubt that the White Tower's defensive magic array had disappeared. There was also no doubt that what has just occurred wasn't a dream, but reality. Zero Wing's guild leader is actually so powerful. Is he even human? All of the White Tiger Dojo disciples were fighting experts, and although they hadn't seen exactly what Shifeng had done, they knew that the vast difference between them wasn't as simple as basic attributes. Shifeng was leaps and bounds ahead of them in combat standards, as well. When they thought about Shifeng's power, they envied Zero Wing's internal members. Unlike Zero Wing's members, they were only here because the White Tiger Dojo had commissioned Zero Wing to train them. Once they were powerful enough, Zero Wing would stop their training. On the other hand, Zero Wing, and by extension, Shifeng, would train Zero Wing's internal members to their full potential. Shifeng simply chuckled at his players' hushed discussions as he stood at the foot of the White Tower. He then pushed open the tightly sealed doors, curious about what lay beyond. After experiencing the Black Pearl's attacks personally, Shifeng had become even more certain that the device had been passed down since ancient times. He was also sure that it was meant to train players' combat standards. Players had to have reached the half-step refinement realm and be able to observe their surroundings constantly to pass the 50-yard mark. To cross the 30-yard mark, players had to reach the refinement realm. Without precise control of their own movements, players wouldn't be able to dodge or block the varying attacks at the same time. Aside from physical control, players had to have accurate judgment of movement within their environment to continue past the 30-yard mark. The players who could reach the foot of the tower had reached the limit of the refinement realm. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call them half-step flowing water realm experts. For the White Tiger Dojo disciples and Zero Wing internal members, who had yet to reach the half-step refinement realm, reaching the tower was simply too difficult. Even Gentle Snow, Fire Dance, and Zero Wing's other refinement realm experts would likely struggle to reach the tower. Shifeng had to admit that the tower was an excellent tool to help players reach the refinement realm. The Black Pearl didn't use the same attack method as monsters, which wouldn't constantly target players' weak points. Not even a group of Refinement Realm experts could elicit a similar result. The only downside was that the Black Pearl's attacks were monotonous and couldn't adapt to change. Even when the beams adjusted their trajectories or curved, they had fixed patterns, unlike expert players, which changed their attack patterns to fit their situation. It was also why Shifeng had managed to reach the bottom of the tower without using his weapons. However, Shifeng was satisfied with this result. After all, he had never heard of such a training device in God's domain before. If he could use this device, nurturing a batch of experts would be easy. Although, whether or not these experts reached the refinement realm would depend on their individual talent. At most, the training device could offer support, reducing the twists and turns players had to face as they journeyed towards the refinement realm. It didn't guarantee that players would reach a certain standard. Of course, if the various superpowers learned of this training device, Shifeng didn't doubt that they would do everything they could to acquire this lost town. Although the various super first-rate guilds and super guilds had their own training systems and devices, with most having higher quality methods than the White Tower, those systems and devices cost massive amounts of resources to maintain. They could also only nurture a small number of players at once. In contrast, the White Tower could bombard nearly 700 players simultaneously and without strain. This alone would be more than enough to tempt the various superpowers into action. Shifeng didn't bother to explain how he had reached the tower. It was still too soon for Zero Wing current internal members and White Tiger Dojo disciples to take on this training device. They still hadn't grasped many of the basics. Trying to take on so many clever attacks simultaneously was impossible for them. The system would simply beat them, not train them. Meanwhile, as Shifeng entered the tower, a spacious, ancient hall appeared before him. From outside, the White Tower didn't look particularly large. However, its interior resembled that of a stadium that could accommodate over 10,000 people. Various ancient weapons had been put on display in the hall, and it resembled an armory. Shifeng was in awe as he gazed at the weapons around him. Every single weapon in this hall radiated a dense amount of mana. At a glance, it was obvious that these weapons were far superior to the ordinary weapons most players used at this stage of the game. This is an armory. Shifeng was confused as he gazed at the weapons on display. He then approached one of the weapon racks, picking up a spear to inspect. When he read the spear's attribute panel, Shifeng was instantly ecstatic. He was so excited that goosebumps began to cover his skin. Mana weapons. Is every weapon here a mana weapon? Shifeng surveyed his surroundings in shock. There were easily over 10,000 weapons in the hall. God's domain had many different kinds of weapons and equipment, most of which fell into three main categories. The first was the common type. It referred to the weapons and equipment most players currently used. Players of the same class could trade and use weapons and equipment of this type. In battle, their durability would decrease, but they could be repaired out of combat. The second type was the unique type. Specific players could use these weapons and equipment. Even if another player picked one up, the item would be useless to them. Similar to the common type, these weapons and pieces of equipment would lose durability in combat but could be repaired and used indefinitely. The third type was the expendable type. Like the common type, those of the same class could trade and use expendable type weapons. While they wouldn't lose durability in battle, they couldn't be repaired. Once their durability was exhausted, they would be useless. The majority of God's domain's players and NPCs used common type weapons and equipment. Most expendable type weapons and pieces of equipment had been lost in the passing of time. This was due to the uncertainties these items created in battle. However, expendable type weapons and equipment had one massive benefit: absolute power. When the various races had competed for dominance over the God's domain continent during ancient times, the human race had been weak and insignificant. To survive their powerful enemies, humans had discovered a method to improve their strength drastically. This was how expendable type weapons and equipment had come to be. Chapter 1626, Mana Weapon. Chapter 1626, Mana Weapon. Expendable type weapons and equipment didn't function like their common type counterparts. Common type weapons and equipment were designed with both power and stability in mind. Hence, they'd only exert a certain extent of the power of the materials used to create them, nothing more. Meanwhile, expendable type weapons and equipment were only designed with power in mind. These weapons and equipment functioned at the expense of the production materials, which meant that they couldn't be repaired. However, this was also why they were extraordinarily powerful, allowing their users to challenge foes of a higher tier. Mana weapons were the typical representation of expendable type weapons and equipment. As Shurfeng gazed at the mana weapons in the hall, he was at a loss for words. Expendable type weapons and equipment's production had ceased long ago in God's domain, and any discovered items had survived since ancient times. Normally, players had no hope of encountering such weapons and equipment. When a mana weapon or piece of equipment had surfaced in the past, players had fought fiercely over the item. After all, high-tiered mana weapons could grant players the power to defeat opponents of a higher tier. No player in God's domain could resist the temptation. Yet, over 10,000 mana weapons were on display before him. Why wouldn't Shurfeng be astonished? As expected of a lost town, it's no wonder why the various superpowers fought over them so desperately. Shurfeng sighed ruefully as he felt the flowing mana within the spear he held. In the past, Shurfeng had assumed that the various superpowers only vied for the lost town's abilities. However, it seemed that had only been a part of the reason. The riches these lost towns contained was likely another major factor. Unlike ordinary weapons, mana weapons did not have a level requirement, only a tier requirement. They were somewhat similar to magic scrolls, although magic scrolls couldn't compare to the power of a mana weapon. Magic scrolls were generally single-use items, but mana weapons could be used until their durability hit 0. Hence, these weapons' market price had been insanely high in Shurfeng's previous life. A Tier 1 mana weapon had cost at least 150 gold in the past, far more expensive than Tier 1 magic scrolls. Even so, tons of players had fought for the chance to wield one. After all, only a small fraction of God's domain's player population had reached the higher tiers, not all players could do so. Meanwhile, Tier 1 mana weapons would even be of significant help to Tier 2 players. One of these weapons could, at the very least, increase a Tier 2 player's combat power by 20%. If a Tier 1 player used a Tier 1 mana weapon, their combat power would increase by a minimum of 50%. Although the boost wasn't as impactful as a berserk skill, it still allowed elite players to face expert players of the same tier and level. Many wealthy elite and ordinary expert players had purchased Tier 1 mana weapons to use in critical situations. As for Tier 2 mana weapons, they had sold for at least 1,000 gold each in the past. Tier 2 mana weapons would even be useful to Tier 3 players. Tier 3 mana weapons were even more frightening, even providing a significant boost to Tier 4 players. They were no less valuable than Tier 4 magic scrolls, and the various superpowers had fought desperately to claim any Tier 3 mana weapon that had been found. Meanwhile, the majority of the weapons in the hall were Tier 1 mana weapons. Even so, Shurfeng spotted over 1,000 Tier 2 mana weapons, and most importantly, he counted 12 Tier 3 mana weapons in crystal cabinets in the hall's center. If he sold all of these mana weapons, he'd earn enough coins to make the various super guilds drool. As Shurfeng prepared to store every mana weapon in his bag, the system's familiar voice reached his ears. System, this item is still bound and cannot be stored in your bag. System, if you wish to remove this item's bound status, you must take control of the lost town. Sure enough, the system won't allow players to obtain such an advantage so easily. Shurfeng smiled bitterly at the spear in his hands. However, after giving the matter some thought, he found it reasonable. If he were allowed to walk away with every mana weapon in this hall, he'd make a huge profit even if he failed to secure the lost town itself. It seems that I have no choice but to collect the weapons after I take control of the town. Shurfeng refocused his attention and made his way towards the tower's top floor. At the same time, he became more interested in capturing this lost town. If he took control of this town, not only would Zero Wing secure another method of nurturing refinement realm experts, but they'd also rake in a massive fortune. The guild would then have all the manpower and wealth it needed. With these factors taken care of, it would be odd if the guild didn't become a major power. Soon, Shi Feng reached the tower's second floor. The second-floor hall was visibly smaller than the first-floor hall, and 10 translucent ghosts wandered the area. Some wore plate armor, some wore leather armor, and some wore cloth armor. Every one of these ghosts radiated a horrific aura, and even Shi Feng felt an intense pressure weigh down on him as he bathed in the powerful energy. Wandering Soul, Undead, Grand Lord. Level 80. HP 180-000/180-000-000. Tyrant's Soul, Undead, Mythic. Level 80. HP 420-000/420-000-000. Shi Feng could not help his surprise when he saw all of these powerful monsters, and a frown pulled at his lips. Had he only had to face one level 80 Grand Lord, he wouldn't have had much of a problem, but there were a total of 9 level 80 Grand Lords before him. Moreover, the distance between each Grand Lord was practically negligible. If he attracted one of the Wandering Souls, he was guaranteed to pull the other 8 Wandering Souls. However, these 9 Wandering Souls weren't his biggest problem. There was actually a mythic-ranked Tyrant's Soul. Although Shi Feng recognized his own strength, he'd grossly overestimate himself if he thought that he could defeat a level 80 mythic monster. In fact, the Tyrant's Soul could likely one-shot him. I guess the system doesn't intend to allow anyone on the 3rd floor. Shi Feng felt his head ache as he looked at the Tyrant's Soul, who remained motionless in the center of the hall. The spiral staircase that led to the 3rd floor lay directly behind the Tyrant's Soul. Shi Feng had assumed that he would be able to walk up to the tower's top floor effortlessly, but it seemed that obtaining the magic crystal treasure chest would be more difficult than he had thought. If he had faced such a situation outside of the tower, he could likely rely on Zero Wing and the White Tiger Dojo's members to sneak past the Tyrant's Soul and Wandering Souls. However, they were still stuck outside of the tower, as were the 5 Great Lords under his control. Without his Great Lords and the other players, dodging the Wandering Soul's attacks would be extremely difficult. If the Tyrant's Soul joined the fray, he'd likely die in an instant. Although he had an invulnerability skill, Absolute Domain had a short duration of 10 seconds. Dashing from the edge of the 2nd floor hall to the staircase and ascending to the 3rd floor to open the magic crystal treasure chest in 10 seconds was impossible. Once Absolute Domain's duration ended, the Tyrant's Soul would slap him down. Yet, if he gave up, he'd never retrieve the magic crystal treasure chest. It was even a gold magic crystal treasure chest. He had only heard rumors of such a thing during his previous life. Shi Feng then calmed himself and moved around the hall while observing the Tyrant's Soul and Wandering Souls, hoping to find some angle he could take advantage of. But after watching the monsters for over 10 minutes, he failed to find any opportunities. While he had been watching, the Tyrant's Soul had stood deathly still in front of the spiral staircase. If he attempted to approach the staircase, the mythic-ranked boss would likely discover him. With no external factors to take advantage of, Shi Feng was forced to flip through his bag, hoping that he'd find something useful. As Shi Feng began to consider giving up, he noticed that he still had a Tier 3 defensive magic scroll. He had obtained the scroll from the Purgatory Serpent. As his gaze touched upon the scroll, Shi Feng's hopes rekindled. A Tier 3 defensive magic scroll could even block a Tier 4 existence's attacks for a short time. With the scroll and his absolute domain, it wasn't entirely impossible to secure the magic crystal treasure chest. Now, the only problem was the Tyrant's Soul's exact strength. If it were too powerful, it wouldn't need much time to break through the defensive magic scroll's barrier, and Shi Feng's death would be certain. After considering his options for some time, Shi Feng decided that it was worth a try. If he died, he'd lose 1 level at most. 1 level was a small price to pay for a gold magic crystal treasure chest. Following which, Shi Feng used Phantom Kill and had his doppelganger carefully cross to the opposite side of the hall. Meanwhile, Shi Feng readied the Tier 3 defensive magic scroll before activating the Aura of Wind's Gale domain and charging forward. When Shi Feng was within 100 yards of the Tyrant's soul and Wandering Souls, a cold glint flashed in the 10 monsters' eyes. They charged at Shi Feng like ferocious beasts. The Tyrant's soul moved like lightning. Before Shi Feng had even crossed 5 yards, the mythic monster had appeared before him. The Gossamer boss had already conjured a blue lightning blade in its right hand and swung it down towards Shi Feng. Chapter 1627, Magic Crystal Treasure Chest. Chapter 1627, Magic Crystal Treasure Chest. So fast. Shi Feng's complexion darkened when he saw the Tyrant's soul appear before him suddenly. Although he had long since known that he was no match for a level 80 mythic monster, he had never imagined that the Tyrant's soul would be so agile. Despite his dark iron bloodline, he could only barely catch a glimpse of the Tyrant's soul's moving figure. Meanwhile, the Tyrant's soul did not give Shi Feng any opportunity to defend himself as it gathered mana in its right hand and molded it into a blade of lightning. It then swung the blue lightning blade down at Shi Feng. The lightning blade tore through the air effortlessly, producing not a single sound as it descended on Shi Feng. Or to put it in another way, the lightning blade moved so swiftly that even the sound it generated could not keep up with it. Shi Feng immediately understood that it was already too late for him to defend himself using his swords. Yet, if he allowed the lightning blade to land on him, he would die without a doubt. At the critical moment, he used Divine Steps, 10 doppelgangers of himself splitting out from his body. Then, he promptly switched positions with one of his doppelgangers. The moment Shi Feng was done switching positions, the doppelganger he had swapped with got split in half by the Tyrant's soul. The lightning blade also left a thin crack beneath the doppelganger's feet, the crack extending 50 yards. Only a brief moment later did the sound of air being torn apart enter his ears. For a moment, Shi Feng was even under the illusion that the Tyrant's soul's attack had split the entire second floor in half. Right then, when Shi Feng looked at the Tyrant's soul, which was clad in a set of dark gold-colored runic armor with a pitch-black crown on its head, he could not help but doubt it was actually a mythic monster. Mythic monsters were indeed powerful and possessed superb basic attributes. However, in terms of combat standards, most were on par with ordinary experts, who were only capable of reaching the trial tower's 5th floor. However, through that single attack, Shi Feng could tell that the Tyrant's soul was already close to reaching the refinement realm standard. It had no excess actions in its movements. Including the absolute speed it possessed, the Tyrant's soul could slaughter even a party of Tier 3 experts of the same level. If not for Divine Steps, he would have no doubt been killed instantly just now. Not daring to waste any time, Shi Feng immediately dashed towards the spiral staircase while having his 10 doppelgangers distract the Tyrant's soul. Although the doppelgangers summoned using Divine Steps were incapable of attacking, they were also invulnerable. No matter how the Tyrant's soul attacked them, they would remain unaffected. Hence, they definitely had a chance to delay the Tyrant's soul for a brief moment. After all, regardless of how powerful a monster was, their intellect was still far from comparable to NPCs, much less to players. In the blink of an eye, Shi Feng had shaken the Tyrant's soul off his tail. However, after he moved forward for just a few steps, the 9 wandering souls reached him. Even Shi Feng would be troubled when pitted against 9 level 80 Grand Lords. Fortunately, unlike the Tyrant's soul, which remained basically unaffected by Shi Feng's Gale domain, the wandering souls had their movement speeds reduced considerably. In addition, Gale domain boosted Shi Feng's speed significantly. Purely in terms of movement speed, Shi Feng was superior to the wandering souls. Hence, he could evade the attack trajectories of the wandering souls relatively easily. For safety's sake, though, he still activated Defensive Blade. Although the combat standards of the 9 wandering souls were far from comparable to the Tyrant's souls, these were still at the trial tower's 4th floor. Ordinary experts would still get killed instantly if they went up against the Grand Lords. Feng was only relying on his advantage in speed and his grasp of his surroundings to just barely dodge the attacks of the Wandering Souls. However, as the Wandering Souls outnumbered him greatly, even he could avoid only a portion of the attacks sent at him. He had to rely on Defensive Blade to block the rest. Following which, Defensive Blade's block count continuously decreased as Feng neared the spiral staircase. 10 times. 8 times. 5 times. When Defensive Blade's block count was close to depleted, Feng was still over 20 yards away from the staircase. At this time, the 9 Wandering Souls gave up on trying to engage Feng in a melee and switched to spells to attack him. Suddenly, dozens of Shadow Blades formed in midair. They even know Shadow Sanctions, the fastest Tier 3 spell available. Feng frowned. There were weak spells and strong spells. Likewise, there were slow spells and fast spells. Shadow Sanctions was the fastest Tier 3 spell available in the game. Although it packed a weak punch and barely dealt any damage against monsters and players of the same level and tier, when used against a player that was inferior in terms of both levels and tiers, it could easily become a lethal spell. Not to mention, all 9 Wandering Souls were using the same spell. Even a Tier 3 player of the same level would get killed if they were careless. In the next moment, under the control of the Wandering Souls, the dozens of Shadow Blades flew towards Feng. Xiao! 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 Just when the Shadow Blades were about to reach Feng, he switched positions with the doppelganger he summoned using Phantom Kill and appeared on the other side of the spiral staircase. As for his doppelganger, the numerous Shadow Blades instantly annihilated it. Close 1. Feng felt extremely fortunate that he had not tried to defend against those Shadow Blades. The only way he could have blocked all those attacks just now was with Absolute Domain. However, if he wasted Absolute Domain here, even if he managed to reach the Magic Crystal treasure chest later, he would be powerless to do anything about it. After killing his doppelganger, the Wandering Souls charged at Feng's real body once again. However, they were too far away. By the time the Wandering Souls arrived at the spiral staircase, he was already halfway up. Since Feng's movement speed originally surpassed that of the Wandering Souls, despite the Grand Lords giving their all into chasing him, the distance between them only widened. Shortly after, Feng arrived at the top floor of the tower. Sure enough, it isn't locked. Feng grew ecstatic when he saw the Magic Crystal treasure chest placed in the middle of the top floor. Previously, he couldn't determine whether the treasure chest was locked or not. From what he knew of Magic Crystal treasure chests, they were never locked. However, those treasure chests all had silver runes carved on them. Hence, he had not been certain that gold Magic Crystal treasure chests wouldn't have locks. By the time Feng got to the treasure chest, the 9 Wandering Souls had just arrived on the top floor. When the Grand Lords noticed Feng's location, they let loose an angry outcry that echoed throughout the entire tower. Even the Zero Wing members and White Tiger Dojo disciples resting over 100 yards away from the tower could not help but shudder at the Grand Lord's powerful roars. What's going on? Quick, look! The guild leader has already arrived before the treasure chest. Wait, there seem to be monsters. What? Those are 9 level 80 Grand Lords. Everyone's eyes widened when they looked at the Wandering Souls chasing after Feng. Initially, they had felt excited at his obtaining the Magic Crystal treasure chest. Now, they only felt sympathy for him. Even if their entire team of nearly 700 players went up against one Wandering Soul, they would not be able to make the Grand Lord break a sweat. Yet, now, 9 of these level 80 Grand Lords had actually appeared at the same time. Who could possibly stop them? When the Wandering Souls were less than 10 yards away from Feng, his lips suddenly curled up in a smile. Activate. Triple Flame Barrier. In the next moment, Feng unfurled the Tier 3 magic scroll in his hand and completed the activation chant. Suddenly, emerald flames emerged from the ground around Feng and formed a pyramid that enveloped him completely. When the 9 Wandering Souls bombarded Feng with spells, their spells were all burnt into oblivion by the emerald flames. When the weapons the wandering souls wielded clashed against the flame pyramid, they immediately melted under the high temperatures of the flames. The might of the triple flame barrier exceeded Shi Feng's expectations entirely. Following which, Shi Feng started opening the magic crystal treasure chest. The triple flame barrier lasted 30 seconds. Normally, that should be just enough time to activate a treasure chest. When Shi Feng clicked on the magic crystal treasure chest, the loading bar that appeared before him showed that it would take 30 seconds to open the treasure chest. Upon seeing this, he breathed out a sigh of relief. However, 3 seconds into the activation process, a flash of lightning appeared at the spiral staircase. When the lightning disappeared, the figure of the Tyrant's soul appeared. At this moment, the Tyrant's soul's eyes were releasing scorching flames, its entire body wreathed in golden arcs of electricity. As soon as the Tyrant's soul appeared, it immediately began chanting an incantation while writing divine runes in the air. In the next moment, a magic array with a 100-yard radius formed in the sky above the Tyrant's soul. Several plasma balls the size of hills started coalescing below the magic array. Under the mythic monster's guidance, the plasma balls then rained down on Shi Feng one after another. Chapter 1628, Tyrant. Chapter 1628, Tyrant. What with the appearance of the massive magic array and the hill-sized plasma balls that blotted out the sky above the tower, it felt as if Armageddon had descended. Loud crackling sounds echoed throughout the space around the White Tower. The frightening pressure from the massive magic array made the hearts of the players standing below the tower palpitate, their breathing becoming somewhat stifled. When the crowd below the tower saw the Tyrant's soul, which hovered in midair, their mouths gaped in shock. A mythic. That's a mythic monster. We're doomed. Why is there such a powerful monster here? Whether it was Zero Wing's internal members or the White Tiger Dojo's disciples, they rarely ever raided dungeons, much less fought against incomparably powerful bosses. The strongest monster they'd fought against thus far was the Purgatory Serpent. Meanwhile, just the Purgatory Serpent alone had already made them despair. Their reaction to the mythic monster before them went without saying. Looking at the Tyrant's soul, although everyone knew that the mythic monster's target wasn't them, their minds still could not help but conceive the thought of turning around and fleeing. Meanwhile, when Shi Feng looked at the descending plasma balls, his complexion darkened significantly. Although he had long since known that his doppelgangers could only delay the Tyrant's soul for a short time, he had not expected the mythic monster to be ruthless enough to use Thunder Plasma, a Tier 4 spell, as soon as it appeared. Tier 4 spells originally already possessed frightening destructive power, but Thunder Plasma was even one of the top-ranking Tier 4 spells available in the game. The spell's power was very close to rivaling that of a Tier 4 curse. Even Tier 4 monsters would be heavily injured if struck by this spell. At this moment, however, it was already too late for Shi Feng to do anything about the situation. While activating a treasure chest, players were not allowed to move away. As long as they shifted their position, they would have to redo the activation process. Not to mention, now that the plasma balls were already descending on him, he wouldn't be able to escape getting struck unless he moved out of the spell's 100-yard radius AoE. In the next moment, numerous plasma balls bombarded the triple flame barrier one after another. Boom! 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 Each time a plasma ball landed on the triple flame barrier, the emerald flame pyramid trembled violently. With each subsequent blast, the emerald flames also weakened. The sound of each impact echoed throughout the lost town. The intense shockwaves created were palpable even for the crowd standing over 100 yards away from the tower. Thunder Plasma lasted for a total of 6 seconds. By the time the spell ended, cracks had appeared in the formerly sturdy triple flame barrier. The emerald flames had also dimmed considerably. Upon seeing that the triple flame barrier was still standing, Shi Feng could not help but breathe out a sigh of relief. As expected of a spell known for having power approaching that of Tier 4 curses, its might really is frightening. After taking a glance at the triple flame barrier's remaining duration, Shi Feng could not help but smile bitterly. The barrier originally should have been able to last 30 seconds. Only a few seconds had passed since he activated it, yet after the bombardment from Thunder Plasma, the system actually notified him that the triple flame barrier's remaining duration was just 12 seconds. Despite the triple flame barrier's duration remaining completely unaffected even when receiving the assault of the Wandering Souls, a single attack from the Tyrant's soul had depleted the barrier's energy so significantly. If the Tyrant's soul executed another attack of similar power, the triple flame barrier would definitely break. Fortunately, Thunder Plasma was a spell with a very long cooldown. Even if the Tyrant's soul was a mythic monster, it wouldn't be able to use Thunder Plasma again anytime soon. However, even while Shifeng was having such thoughts, the Tyrant's soul began chanting an incantation and writing divine runes once again. Compared to when it was casting Thunder Plasma, the Tyrant's soul spent much more time casting this spell. It invested a total of 6 seconds into it. After the mythic monster was done chanting, a new magic array appeared in the space above the tower. Although this magic array's AoE was not as large as Thunder Plasma's magic array, it was a bona fide twofold magic array, a silver magic array and a pitch-black magic array. As the two magic arrays intermingled, they sucked the lost town dry of its ambient mana. For a moment, everyone inside the town felt their perception and vision blur. Is there a need to be so desperate? Shifeng was at a loss for words when he saw the twofold magic array in the sky. Tier 4 Curse, Thunder God's Annihilation. Although the curse's AoE was much smaller, in terms of power, it was much stronger than even ordinary Tier 5 spells. Even Tier 5 creatures would dread this curse. They would definitely sustain severe injuries if struck by it. In the next moment, the two magic arrays transformed into a ball of black and white light. Arcs of electricity also wreathed the ball of light. As the ball of light descended, it was as if the space surrounding it froze. At this moment, the Tyrant's soul also abruptly revealed a human-like sneer as it looked at Shifeng as if it was saying, "What else can you do?" At this moment, even if Shifeng was a fool, he could tell that the triple flame barrier wouldn't be able to endure this apocalyptic attack. Gritting his teeth, he immediately took out a crimson elemental source and set it in the heart of the triple flame barrier's magic array. Elemental sources had many uses, with their main purpose being the creation of elemental weapons. However, Shifeng could not care less right now. If he wanted to have any chance to acquire the magic crystal treasure chest, his only choice was to use the fire-type elemental source. If he failed today, obtaining the treasure chest would definitely become much harder in the future. In God's domain, monsters, particularly high-tiered monsters, all possessed a certain degree of intellect. If he failed to obtain the treasure chest today, the Tyrant's soul would definitely guard the treasure chest much more strictly on his next visit. After going through so many difficulties to get to this point, Shifeng had no intention of giving up just like that. As the refined energy of the elemental source flowed into the triple flame barrier, the previously dim, emerald flames flared up. Moreover, the color of the flames even transformed from emerald to white-hot. Now, the flame pyramid looked more like a dazzling sun brightly illuminating the entire lost town. When the ball of black and white light crashed into the triple flame barrier, the resulting impact shook the entire white tower. Even the players standing 100 yards away from the tower were sent flying over 10 yards, their bodies fell to the ground one after another. Shocked expressions filled everyone's faces as they stared at the clash of lightning and flames above the tower. The White Tiger Dojo disciples, in particular, suddenly felt as if they were living in an entirely different world from Shifeng. At the same time, they also came to have a new understanding of the battles in God's domain. Before, they thought that it was already plenty amazing that players could conduct superhuman battles in the game. However, the battle they were witnessing now could no longer be considered to be a player's battle. Instead, it was more like a battle between two apocalyptic beasts. A simple exchange between these beasts could easily deform the surrounding terrain. As the seconds passed by, the dazzling triple flame barrier began fading. The lost town returned to its dimly illuminated state. Fortunately, the ball of black and white light also started decreasing in size. After nearly 10 seconds had gone by, the ball of light disappeared. Meanwhile, the flame pyramid created by the triple flame barrier had also reverted to an emerald color. Shifeng breathed out a deep sigh of relief after seeing this situation. Fortunately, he had brought along elemental sources with him, which allowed him to strengthen the Tier 3 triple flame barrier, letting it possess the might of a Tier 4 defensive spell. However, the Tyrant's Soul's Thunder God's annihilation had also depleted the elemental source's energy completely. Although the elemental source's power was exhausted, the triple flame barrier's duration had also recovered to its normal state. It would now last him until the activation process of the treasure chest was over. However, the Tyrant's Soul did not stop attacking despite the failure of its second attack. It immediately started preparing another Tier 4 spell to bombard Shifeng with. The number of Tier 4 spells the mythic monster grasped astonished even Shifeng. The Tyrant's Soul possessed not only an extremely high combat standard but also many Tier 4 spells. Against such a monster, even a 100-man team of Tier 3 experts of the same level would get routed. Fortunately, the triple flame barrier endured the Tyrant's Soul's third attack without faltering. Eventually, when the emerald flame pyramid disappeared, the magic crystal treasure chest also opened. Seeing the treasure chest open infuriated the Tyrant's Soul. Its body started to release pitch-black fog. Then, the mythic monster charged at Shifeng with the speed of lightning. Shifeng activated Absolute Domain without hesitation. Without even looking, he frantically plucked items from inside the treasure chest and placed them in his bag. Die! The Tyrant's Soul could not help but bellow in rage at this scene. This time, though, the mythic monster did not gather mana and summon a lightning blade to its hand. Instead, it unsheathed a rusted longsword hung around its waist. Although this longsword looked very ordinary, space tore apart wherever the edge of this longsword crossed. The Tyrant's Soul swung the longsword down at Shifeng ruthlessly. Chapter 1629, Saint Weapon. Chapter 1629, Saint Weapon. Shifeng's complexion darkened at the sight of the rusted longsword descending towards him. Although Tier 4 existences were capable of tearing apart space with their attacks, this required a considerable amount of effort. Yet, the Tyrant's Soul's rusted longsword achieved this feat with seemingly no effort on the mythic monster's part. This meant that every one of the Tyrant's Soul's normal attacks would carry power equivalent to that of an ordinary mythic monster executing an all-out attack. As the rusted longsword descended, a black seam cut at the golden barrier that appeared around Shifeng. Boom! Along with a loud boom, a powerful gale surged into the tower's surroundings. The players standing outside the tower lost their footing once more. What kind of monster is this? Is a mythic monster really that powerful? Everyone could not help but gape in shock as they gazed up at the Tyrant's Soul. Just the shockwave from one of the Tyrant's Soul's attacks reduced them to such a miserable state. If they fought the mythic monster, the consequences would be unimaginable. As the dust above the tower settled, Shifeng, who had activated Absolute Domain, emerged, apparently intact. However, the impact resulting from the attack had driven him back several steps before he could stabilize himself. What is that sword? Shifeng wore a grim expression as he stared at the Tyrant's Soul's longsword. Although Absolute Domain was an invulnerability skill, there was no true invulnerability in God's domain. Even so, Absolute Domain should have no problem blocking Tier 4 attacks. Yet, against the Tyrant's Soul's longsword, Absolute Domain was no longer absolute. Absolute Domain created a protective barrier made up of divine runes around his body. Meanwhile, the moment the rusted longsword collided with the protective barrier, Shifeng had clearly seen the rusted longsword moving roughly an inch into the barrier, deforming it. The intense impact had even forced him to retreat by 4 steps. This was something Shifeng had never seen happen before. Not waiting for Shifeng to make a move, the Tyrant's Soul immediately brandished its rusted longsword again. Suddenly, several black seams extended towards him. Previously, one black seam had been enough to drive Shifeng back by several steps already. When multiple black seams descended on him simultaneously, he suddenly felt death looming over him. Without hesitation, he activated Disintegration Field to suppress the Tyrant's soul. Although the domain skill had little effect on mythic monsters, it could still reduce the Tyrant's soul's basic attributes slightly. Following which, Shifeng activated the Tier 2 Taboo skill Instant Strike, instantly disappearing from his original location, appearing slightly closer to the Tyrant's soul, and narrowly avoiding the several spatial tier attacks. Although Instant Strike increased both his damage and attack speed drastically, Shifeng had no intention of clashing with the Tyrant's soul. Instead, he turned around and continued looting the magic crystal treasure chest. The treasure chest held many items. However, since he did not know which one was the most valuable, he simply picked up as many as he could. In the blink of an eye, 2 more items entered his bag. Upon seeing this, the Tyrant's soul became even more enraged and brandished its rusted sword again. The Tyrant's soul's attack speed was extremely fast. Even Shifeng could not dodge the mythic monster's attacks in time. Knowing this, he decided not to dodge and allowed the Tyrant's soul to attack him as it wished while he continued looting the treasure chest. Right now, every additional item he obtained counted. Boom. 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 Beneath the bombardment, Shifeng got pushed aside time after time. As a result of receiving multiple powerful attacks in quick succession, the duration of the protective shield, which should have lasted 10 seconds, decreased significantly. Regardless, Shifeng persisted in looting the treasure chest. Despicable thief! You dare take my family's treasures! I will turn you into ashes, the Tyrant's soul bellowed. In the next moment, the black fog its body emitted merged with the rusted longsword. Suddenly, silver divine runes started appearing along the rusted blade of the longsword. Although the blade looked very ordinary, the instant the runes on the silver blade lit up, Shifeng, who was heading towards the treasure chest once again after being blown away, abruptly halted in his tracks. He then instinctively retreated a step. Death! Shifeng saw his death when he looked at the silver longsword. Moreover, this wasn't any ordinary death. For a moment, he felt that, should he take another step forward, he would thoroughly disappear from God's domain. Meanwhile, when the Tyrant's soul looked at Shifeng now, although its complexion had paled considerably and it appeared quite fatigued, absolute confidence filled its eyes. It was as if it knew that at this moment, nothing could stop its attack. Not good. Shifeng suddenly thought of a certain matter, his complexion turning ashen instantly. He hastily switched to the aura of space and activated space movement, opening a spatial tunnel before him. Despite absolute domain having another 3 seconds left, he jumped into the spatial tunnel without hesitation. As soon as Shifeng jumped into the spatial tunnel, the Tyrant's soul arrived before the tunnel and slashed its longsword at the tunnel. When the longsword descended, the clouds a long distance away split apart. Likewise, the spatial tunnel, which the silver longsword had made direct contact with, was cut in half. What kind of attack is that? When the far-off members of Zero Wing and the White Tiger Dojo saw the massive tear in space that had appeared above the tower as well as the bisected spatial tunnel, their eyes nearly fell out of their own sockets. A spatial tunnel was created by opening a hole in space. Yet, the Tyrant's soul had actually managed to slice even the spatial tunnel in half. Meanwhile, after the spatial tunnel was cut in two, it instantly disappeared into nothingness. Despicable thief! I will never let you get away, the Tyrant's soul bellowed in rage when it saw Shifeng escaping successfully, its voice echoing throughout the lost town. When the members of Zero Wing and White Tiger Dojo, who stood at a distance, felt the killing intent the Tyrant's soul radiated, they felt as if their bodies had petrified, they did not dare to move even in the slightest. Meanwhile, beside a flowing stream located in a map neighboring the Boneless Land, Shifeng suddenly appeared. The moment he exited the spatial tunnel, he collapsed to the ground, panting heavily. That was close. He had very nearly lost everything. As expected of the guardian of a gold magic crystal treasure chest. It actually possesses even a saint weapon. When Shifeng recalled the Tyrant's soul's final attack, he could not help but shudder in fear. Previously, he had failed to detect what made the Tyrant's soul's longsword so special. He simply felt that it was a very powerful weapon. However, the moment he saw the divine runes on the silver longsword lighting up as well as sensed the monstrous amounts of mana the weapon exuded. Aside from a tier 5 mana weapon, he really could not figure out what other weapons could replicate such a feat. Mana weapons were originally meant to suck dry the potential of their raw materials and exhibit power beyond one's imagination. However, the higher tiered a mana weapon was, the more difficult it was to produce it. Among them, tier 3 mana weapons were labeled as higher order mana weapons, while tier 5 mana weapons were labeled as saint weapons. Needless to say, saint weapons were exceedingly rare in God's domain, so much so that their rarity rivaled that of legendary weapons. In the past, he had seen the battle video of a tier 5 expert wielding a saint weapon against a tier 6 god-ranked expert. When the tier 5 expert invested all his power into his saint weapon for an all-out attack, silver divine runes had appeared on the saint weapon. Back then, even the tier 6 god-ranked expert had to go full bore to repulse the saint weapon's attack. One could just imagine how powerful saint weapons were. Had he been killed by the Tyrant's soul's attack just now, he definitely wouldn't have lost only a single level. Most likely, even his immortal soul would have been annihilated. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly and left in time. Meanwhile, just as Shifeng was about to celebrate, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, you have angered the Tyrant's soul. The Tyrant's soul has used soul pursuit on you and will send a soul doppelganger after you once every day. Chapter 1630, Abundant Harvest. Chapter 1630, Abundant Harvest. Shifeng could not help but frown as he read the system notification. Soul pursuit was a type of curse. It was one of the most common in God's domain and very challenging to deal with. Regardless of where players were, the user's soul doppelganger would appear beside them. Shifeng was already familiar with the Tyrant's soul's power. The fact that it wielded a saint weapon put its attack power on par with ordinary tier 5 classes. If it really came down to a fight, even a 100-man tier 3 team of the same level would have to use special means to take the mythic monster down. Current players simply had no hope against the Tyrant's soul. Although Soul Doppelganger wasn't as powerful as the main body during the first few appearances, it would grow stronger with each attempt to slay the target until it eventually rivaled its user. There were two ways to resolve this type of curse. The first was to kill the main body, while the second was to kill the final Soul Doppelganger, which would be as strong as the main body. There were no other ways to stop soul pursuit. Clearly, the first method was impossible for Shifeng right now, and the second would require a long, arduous battle with the Tyrant's soul, would only complicate his future development. As Shifeng tried to think of a way to deal with the Tyrant's soul's persistent pursuit, his head began to ache. If the Soul Doppelganger only showed up once every 3 or 5 days, he could cope, but he hadn't expected the Tyrant's soul's curse to hound him once every day. In other words, he would have to defeat the Tyrant's soul's Soul Doppelganger once every day. Moreover, it would appear at random. Although he could hide in an NPC city and let the city's guards deal with the Tyrant's soul's doppelganger, he wouldn't accomplish anything if he did. Shifeng could only shake his head with a bitter smile about his situation. He had never thought that looting a magic crystal treasure chest would be so problematic. The most frustrating part was that he had only managed to grab 5 items from the magic crystal treasure chest. The chest contained at least another 5 or 6 items. Had he collected all of the items, he wouldn't have minded the Tyrant's soul's hunt, yet he had to avoid the Soul Doppelganger despite only claiming half of the treasure chest's items. But Shifeng didn't give the matter too much thought. Instead, he instructed Zero Wing's internal members and the White Tiger Dojo's disciples to leave the lost town and wait for his arrival. Meanwhile, he examined the items he had acquired from the treasure chest. In his previous life, he had heard countless rumors about gold magic crystal treasure chests' loot even surpassing the quality of items in epic treasure chests. However, since the 12 Sacred Elementalists' Chaos Star had been the only known player to obtain a gold magic crystal treasure chest and had never divulged any information about his bounty, these rumors had been nothing more than that, just rumors. After Shi Feng inspected the contents of his bag space, an excited expression illuminated his features, quickly replaced by one of utter shock. So, this is a gold magic crystal treasure chest. Shi Feng was elated as he gazed at the 5 new items in his bag. 3 of the 5 items were pieces of equipment. One was an epic plate armor helmet called the Trembling Crown, and another was an epic shield named Trembling Shield. Both pieces of epic equipment belonged to the Trembling set, a bona fide epic ranked set equipment. When a player equipped 2 pieces of this set, the user would receive a passive skill called Tough Body, which increased the player's endurance and physique by 10% while reducing incoming damage by 20%. An epic set equipment. Acquiring a single epic weapon or piece of equipment was already difficult for God's Domain's current superpowers, not to mention epic set equipment. Even 10 years after God's Domain's launch, epic set equipment had been considered the best available in the game. After all, fragmented legendary and legendary items were simply too rare. Even though Shi Feng only had 2 pieces of the Trembling set, the effects these pieces provided would significantly improve a player's combat power. If one of the guild's MTs equipped these 2 pieces, their combat power would definitely undergo a qualitative transformation. Needless to say, the stronger the guild's MTs were, the more they'd benefit the guild's development. Every guild needed powerful MTs to tank dungeon and field bosses, and if the guild didn't have an MT that could handle the task, it would never complete the raid. However, of the 3 pieces of equipment Shi Feng had looted, the 3rd piece truly surprised him. The 3rd piece of equipment was a Tier 3 mana weapon. Unfortunately, the Tier 3 mana weapon was a 2-handed sword, not a 1-handed sword. Edgeless Blade, 2-handed sword, Tier 3 mana weapon. Equipment requirement, Tier 2. Attack power, 240% of strength. All attributes, increases according to user's level and tier. When equipped, user's body will transform into a mana body, gathering nearby mana to them and strengthening their perception. Improves physique by 15%. Increases strength by 40%, agility by 30%, endurance by 20%. Increases critical rate by 10%. Decreases stamina consumption by 15%. Increases the power of all skills by 20%. Ignore levels plus 15. Durability 220/220. Additional passive skill dash. Mana Strengthening, provides additional basic attributes to the user depending on the density of the ambient mana. The higher the ambient mana density is, the higher the basic attributes provided will be. Basic attributes can increase to a maximum of 20%. Additional active skill dash. Limit Blade, by absorbing the user's power and sacrificing a fraction of the weapon's durability, the edgeless blade will increase the user's strength attribute by 200% for one attack. Each attack costs 1 durability. As this sword is a mana weapon, it cannot be repaired. Weapon will automatically disappear when durability reaches 0. A Tier 3 mana weapon could even provide a tremendous boost to Tier 3 players, and although it was a consumable item, it was even more valuable than epic weapons. The weapon's sole active skill, Limit Blade, was particularly valuable. Although the 200% increase in strength didn't seem much compared to its significant cost, the weapon's attack power was based on the user's strength. Hence, the 200% increase to strength provided a formidable boost to the user's destructive power. If a Tier 3 player equipped this weapon, they could even stand against Tier 4 opponents of the same level. Epic weapons had no chance of achieving such a feat. However, the edgeless blade was only the 3rd most valuable of the items Shi Feng had obtained. The 2nd most valuable item was a Tier 3 combination skill called Fiery Thunderstorm, which required 5 magical class players to perform. This combination skill could even rival a Tier 4 spell. Guilds wouldn't even sell a combination skill of this power for 100,000 magic crystals. After all, the skill that could be a trump card when challenging Tier 4 mythic monsters. Tier 4 magic scrolls were extremely rare in God's domain, but combination skills could be used indefinitely, and such scrolls could never compare to the value of Fiery Thunderstorm. Unfortunately, Fiery Thunderstorm was a single-target spell, not a large-scale destruction spell. Even so, Shifeng was quite satisfied to find this spell in his bag. At the very least, he now had a weapon to deal with Tier 4 mythic monsters. The last of the 5 items was a unique crystal. It was also what shocked Shifeng the most. A burning, purple flame danced within this crystal, and arcs of golden electricity flickered around the flame. The purple flame radiated an intensely tyrannical aura, and Shifeng shuddered as he gazed at it. This flame was also an item Shifeng had been looking for a long time now. It was a Tier 3 mysterious flame called the Purple Thunder Flame. Chapter 1631, Tier 3 Mysterious Flame. Chapter 1631, Tier 3 Mysterious Flame. The crystal-encased, dark purple flame was extremely eye-catching in Shifeng's bag space. "I've really struck gold this time." Shifeng was overjoyed as he gazed at the purple thunder flame. This flame was easily worth more than the other items he had obtained from the magic crystal treasure chest combined. Players would only encounter a Tier 3 mysterious flame if they were lucky enough, and even Shifeng only knew the whereabouts of a small number of them. Moreover, every one of them was exceedingly difficult to obtain. Countless guilds had waged war over mysterious flames in the past. Even super guilds had gone all out to slaughter each other over Tier 3 mysterious flames. The stronger a mysterious flame was, the more it would help forger and alchemist subclasses. These tools would help forgers and alchemists produce high-rank items with ease. Shifeng had never expected that, despite only looting half of the gold magic crystal treasure chest's items, he'd actually acquire a Tier 3 mysterious flame. If he looted the rest of the treasure chest's items, how great would his harvest be? Now, Shifeng more or less understood why the Tyrant's soul was so desperate to hunt him down. After all, a Tier 3 mysterious flame was even more valuable than epic items, and aside from being able to refine materials, mysterious flames could also improve a player's strength in combat. Why would the system let him get away with obtaining one so easily? To Shifeng, a Tier 3 mysterious flame was also a life-saving item. With this Tier 3 mysterious flame, I can buy myself some more time. Shifeng smiled at the purple thunder flame. The curse the mysterious NPC had placed on him back in Blackwing City could only be suppressed with a mysterious flame. Unfortunately, the Tier 2 Ice Blue Devil Flame was too weak, only able to delay the curse's activation for a limited amount of time. Initially, Shifeng had planned to take the risk and obtain one of the Tier 2 or 3 mysterious flames he remembered from his past when he had time. But now, he didn't need to. As long as he absorbed the Tier 3 Purple Thunder Flame and merged it with the Soul Flame, he'd have better control over the Soul Flame. He would then have more time to locate the mysterious NPC and complete the quest Shirlin had given him. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng tapped on the Purple Thunder Flame and chose to bind it to himself. The moment he did so, the crystal containing the Purple Thunder Flame shattered. The dark purple flame entered Shifeng's body, and purple fire devoured his entire body. Arcs of blue electricity flickered around him as a stinging pain assaulted every inch of his body. Shortly after, a loading bar appeared before Shifeng, displaying the fusion process. 1%. 2%. 3%. The fusion was extremely slow. If an ordinary player attempted to merge with this mysterious flame, their mind might crumble under the intense pain after just a short moment. While players had the option of lowering or turning off their pain sensitivity in the game, doing so would sabotage the fusion process. Fortunately, after over 10 years in God's domain, Shifeng had acclimated to the pain. Even so, it was barely tolerable as the fusion process continued. As time passed, the pain's intensity increased, but something felt different about this fusion to Shifeng. Aside from the increased pain, it felt as if the flames refined his body as they continued to burn him. There was a pleasant feeling alongside the pain. As the pain grew worse, his perception sharpened. This surprised Shifeng. He had never heard of mysterious flames strengthening a player's perception and physique. Had the players in his previous life known that Tier 3 mysterious flames could do such a thing, every expert in the game would have gone mad to acquire one for themselves. Stronger perception would undoubtedly improve players' combat standards, and it would only become more beneficial as they reached for higher tiers. Otherwise, God's Domains experts wouldn't have regarded bloodlines and fragmented legendary items so highly. After 20 minutes of the fusion process, Shifeng heard a series of system notifications. System: the purple thunder flame has bound to player Yifeng. System: the purple thunder flame's fusion has completed. After undergoing the purple thunder flame's trial, player gains plus 60 to all basic attributes, physique improved by 5%, reaction speed increased by 10%, perception range increased by 10%, fire resistance plus 70, and lightning resistance plus 70. You have also gained 100% control over the purple thunder flame. Following which, Shifeng proceeded to inspect the purple thunder flame itself. When he saw its information, he couldn't help but gasp. Purple Thunder Flame, Tier 3 Mysterious Flame. When activated, increases movement speed and attack speed by 30%. Increases damage dealt by fire and lightning-type attacks by 50%. Increases destructive effect of attacks by 100%. Increases production success rate for forging, alchemy, and cooking by 15%. Shifeng wasn't surprised by the increase to movement and attack speed, but he had never expected a 100% increase to destructive effects. Although it wouldn't improve players' strength or attack power, the increased destructive effects would be devastating against players' and monsters' defense. A player might struggle against a Great Lord's defense normally, but if their attacks had double the destructive effect, they'd be able to break through the Great Lord's defenses and defeat it in far less time. Likewise, such a boost would be miraculous in PvP. It was common knowledge that players mainly relied on their weapons and equipment for strength. Without weapons and equipment, a player's attributes would decrease drastically. Meanwhile, players would be able to deplete the durability of their opponent's weapons and equipment more quickly with increased destructive effect. As for the 15% improvement to production success rate, it was 5% higher than the Tier 2 Ice Blue Devil Flame. Although it was only a difference of 5%, the Tier 3 Purple Thunder Flame's performance when refining high-rank materials would be leaps and bounds better than the weaker Mysterious Flame. If Shifeng used the Tier 3 Purple Thunder Flame when forging Conqueror's armor, his success rate would skyrocket. After fusing with the Purple Thunder Flame, Shifeng activated Spatial Gate and regrouped with the rest of his team outside of the Lost Town. Although the Tyrant's soul had used soul pursuit on him, Shifeng discovered that the Tyrant's soul itself couldn't leave the White Tower after a few experiments. This outcome allowed Shifeng to breathe a sigh of relief. At the very least, he wouldn't have to lead his team elsewhere to grind and level up. After regrouping with his team, he continued to kill the demonic creatures in the Lost Town's inner area, steadily raising everyone's levels while grinding for mana and Eternium Oregon. After grinding for another 2 days or so, Shifeng and the others finally cleared out every demonic creature in the Lost Town. The only place they had yet to check was the bottomless pit in the town center. Meanwhile, after 2 days of grinding, everyone's levels had risen from nearly level 48 to almost level 50. As for Shifeng, he had invested all of the EXP into leveling Flame Burst and Lightning Edge. Despite being a Tier 2 player, he only had a small number of Tier 2 skills in his arsenal, and if he were forced to rely on Tier 1 skills, he'd never be able to exert the full advantages of a Tier 2 class. Hence, Shifeng leveled these 2 Tier 1 skills to Tier 2. By doing so, both skills had undergone a qualitative transformation in terms of raw power. Flame Burst. Tier 2, Level 3, requires 1,800,000,000 EXP to upgrade to Tier 2, Level 4 skill. Channeling time, 1 second. Gathers the power of flames to a single point and causes 1400% damage to the target. Attack count, 16 times. Cooldown, 3 minutes. Lightning Edge, Action Type. Tier 2, Level 2, requires 1,600,000,000 EXP to upgrade to Tier 2, Level 3. Channeling time, 0.5 seconds. Deals 1200% physical and 1200% lightning damage in a cone in front of user. Initial coverage range is 75 yards. Duration, 5 seconds. Cooldown, 10 minutes. Tier 2 skills weren't just capable of dealing more raw damage than their Tier 1 counterparts, they'd also be more effective against monsters and players of the same tier. Once these skills rose to Tier 2, they wouldn't be bound by tier suppression. It's about time to show everyone Zero Wing's strength. After taking a look at his team members' levels, Sherfone contacted Aqua Rose and asked, "Aqua, how's the equipment collection coming along?" Chapter 1632, Formation of an Expert Legion. Chapter 1632, Formation of an Expert Legion. Star Moon Kingdom, Zero Wing City, Zero Wing's residence. A depressing atmosphere filled the massive guild residence. Everyone's minds were overwhelmed by an oppressive feeling, causing them great distress. Big Sis Aqua, we just received news that the Blackwater Corporation has invested another 200,000 gold into Heaven's Burial. The guild has also hired more refinement realm experts to hunt us down. They're even beginning to overpower the conqueror parties we've recalled to defend our leveling maps. Moreover, according to our spies in Heaven's Burial, it seems that Heaven's Burial has obtained another significant harvest from the Primordial Ancient Ruin. Apparently, the guild has collected 2 sets of top-tier intermediate magic array scrolls and plenty of top-tier level 50 weapons and equipment. At this point, they're already preparing to raid a level 50 super large-scale team dungeon. Yaya reported as she stood beside Aqua Rose with a somber expression. Zero Wing had grown stronger over the past few days as more players gathered in Zero Wing City. However, the number of players withdrawing from the guild also continued to increase. They had done so because Zero Wing's members were almost guaranteed to be ambushed whenever they went to the fields to grind. They could have endured if the situation had only lasted 2 or 3 days, but this had continued for over a week already. Everyone in the guild had long since grown tired of it. Their leveling speed and equipment acquisition rate had suffered severely, as well. To make things worse, Heaven's Burial had grown rapidly in every aspect despite the ongoing war. Many Zero Wing members' wills began to falter. They could no longer see any hope of Zero Wing winning this war, and so, many had given up and left while they still could. They're already starting a super large-scale team dungeon raid? Aqua Rose frowned. At this point, many large guilds had already raided level 50, 100-man team dungeons successfully, but not one of them had raided a level 50 super large-scale team dungeon. Unfortunately, only these dungeons contained level 50 top-tier equipment and set equipment. If Heaven's Burial obtained the first clear of a super large-scale team dungeon in Star Moon Kingdom, the pressure its success would bring on Zero Wing's members would be crushing, even if the guild failed to exhaust Zero Wing. By obtaining the first clear of a level 50 super large-scale team dungeon, not only would a guild obtain a 3-star guild residence promotion order, but it would also obtain level 50 top-tier weapons and equipment. What was players' purpose of joining a guild? Wasn't it to help them obtain better weapons and equipment while leveling faster? As long as Heaven's Burial succeeded, a ton of experts would try to join the guild. After all, not even independent teams could clear a super large-scale team dungeon. As she watched Heaven's Burial grow stronger by the day, Aqua Rose gradually came to understand how frightening guilds with major corporation support were. With an endless financial supply, a guild could attract as many experts and gain as many resources as it wanted. There was simply no way that Zero Wing, a guild that had been built from nothing, could compete with such guilds. It took everything Zero Wing had just to cope with Heaven's Burial's offensive. Big Sis Aqua, Heaven's Burial has stated that if Zero Wing is willing to hand over 51% of its shares, they'll stop their assault on the guild. If we continue to resist, however, they'll thoroughly obliterate us from God's domain. They've only given us 2 days to consider their offer. Here's a video they sent, Yaya whispered. What? Aqua Rose had been about to reject the proposal instantly, but after watching the video from Heaven's Burial, her expression turned solemn. The video depicted an army of evil beasts and evil demons. Although the army was not particularly large, only around 30,000 soldiers, it was an unprecedentedly high-quality force. Among the monsters, the army had over 5 level 72 mythic-ranked evil beasts and 20 level 70 Grand Lord-ranked evil demons. In addition, the force included a large number of level 70 Great Lord-ranked evil demons. The weakest member of the army was Lord rank. Regarding overall strength, this evil beast and evil demon army was far more powerful than the 2 armies Zero Wing had previously faced. If these monsters took action, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even Zero Wing City might fail to stop them. As Aqua Rose struggled to think of a plan, Shifeng contacted her. Aqua, how's the equipment collection coming along? Shifeng asked. We're almost done. We'll have everything we need in a few more hours, Aqua Rose responded dejectedly. All right. I've finished my task as well. I'll return in a moment. Shifeng nodded in satisfaction, surprised by Aqua Rose's efficiency. Although he hadn't requested level 50 top-tier equipment, only asking for elite-grade equipment, it was still a difficult job. They've already reached level 50. Aqua Rose was stunned. They were talking about nearly 700 players. Before Shifeng had taken them out to grind, Zero Wing's internal members and the White Tiger Dojo's disciples had only been around level 30. They had been unimaginably far from level 50. In her opinion, even with Shifeng's astonishing leveling capabilities, he'd still need 2 weeks or so to power level the 700-man team to level 50. Even the most powerful elite members in the various large guilds were only around level 47 right now, and only capable expert players were close to level 50. After all, players needed drastically more EXP to level up after reaching level 45. Yet, Shifeng had helped nearly 700 players catch up to peak experts in less than half of the time she had assumed. They've all reached level 50. Some have even reached level 51, Shifeng said, nodding. If not for the lack of demonic creatures around the lost town, he wouldn't have had an issue getting everyone to level 51 or beyond. Aqua Rose was dazed for a long moment after hearing Shifeng's answer. Level 50 was a major turning point in God's domain. Despite Heaven's Burial's massive expert count, the majority of its experts were stuck at level 49, still far from hitting level 50. Although the difference was only 1 level, the equipment quality was monumental. With the addition of so many level 50 experts, Zero Wing's combat power would rise significantly. However, when Aqua Rose recalled the video Heaven's Burial had sent, her excitement cooled. Guild leader, here is a video Heaven's Burial just sent. They want us to hand over 51% of Zero Wing's shares, or they'll proceed with even more drastic measures to destroy us, Aqua Rose said as she forwarded the video to Shifeng. Against so many high-ranked evil beasts and evil demons, even Zero Wing's additional 700 expert players would be no more than throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. They've already grown so strong. Shifeng muttered as he watched the evil beasts and evil demons in the video. Although he had expected something like this, he couldn't help his astonishment when he actually saw the real deal. In addition to more than 5 level 72 mythic ranked evil beasts and 20 level 70 Grand Lord ranked evil demons, the monster army included more than 1,000 Grand Lord ranked evil beasts and Great Lord ranked evil demons. With such a force, Heaven's Burial would have no problems capturing any guild town in Starmoon Kingdom. Chapter 1633, Intermediate Ability. Chapter 1633, Intermediate Ability. Have you found out anything new about Starmoon Kingdom's Evil God's Temple? Shifeng could not help but ask as he watched Aqua Rose on the screen. Even he did not have any practical methods to deal with Heaven's Burial's monster army. However, he was not particularly worried about the army, either. The situation in Star Moon Kingdom had changed since their last confrontation. NPC armies constantly patrolled the kingdom right now, and if these NPCs encountered any evil beasts or demons, they'd quickly exterminate these monsters. Hence, Heaven's Burial couldn't dispatch an army of evil beasts and evil demons en masse into the kingdom right now. Otherwise, the enemy guild would have done it already, rather than send a video and try to threaten them. Although the monster army couldn't march into the kingdom, it could dispatch small contingents of high-tiered evil demons to ambush players. Hence, Heaven's Burial's monsters were still quite a problem. If Zero Wing wanted to squash this problem thoroughly, it had to destroy the evil god's temple in Star Moon Kingdom. They've hidden it quite well. Even now, we haven't found any clues leading to the kingdom's evil god's temple yet, Aqua Rose said, shaking her head. She continued, moreover, even if Heaven's Burial doesn't mobilize its monster army, at the rate it's growing, it's only a matter of time before the guild overwhelms and crushes us. Based on our most recent information, Blackwater has recently hired another batch of Refinement Realm experts to help hunt our members. It's taking everything we've got just to defend ourselves. If more Refinement Realm experts join the fight, I'm afraid that we won't last very long. In addition, our financial state is particularly concerning. We've already used all of our available funds, and we don't have the support of any major corporation. We're entirely reliant on Zero Wing City, Stone Forest Town, and the Candlelight trading firm's profit to keep the guild running. If something unexpected happens that require those funds, we'll be ruined. She was also aware that Heaven's Burial had merely sent the video to scare them. However, nothing changed the fact that Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's aggression was increasing. Furthermore, Blackwater had recruited plenty of Refinement Realm experts to help in this war using its expansive connections. Initially, Blackwater had sent over 20 Refinement Realm experts to aid Heaven's Burial, and now it was sending an additional 30+ experts. Although the total count was still far less than the Conqueror parties, these Refinement Realm experts would be more than capable of keeping the Conqueror parties busy. With the Conqueror parties distracted, Heaven's Burial's other experts could attack without worry. Because of this, Zero Wing suffered severe casualties. The remuneration the guild paid out every day was astronomical. If any other guild had to pay such a price, it would have long since gone bankrupt. I understand. I'll have everyone return immediately, so your team should get ready to receive them. Also, notify Melancholic and tell her to host an auction in the Zero Wing auction house in 6 hours. We'll sell Zero Wing City's private houses and shops, Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. Right now, he needed to deal with the guild's financial problems. Although he had tried to think of a way to increase Zero Wing's income, these revenue sources weren't enough to compete with Heaven's Burial and Blackwater. We're selling Zero Wing City's private houses and shops. But, with the current situation, I'm afraid that we'll have trouble selling them for a high price. Aqua Rose understood Shifeng's intentions. In fact, she had considered the same option. However, only a fool wouldn't see the situation of Heaven's Burial and Zero Wing's war. With that in mind, no one would willingly spend a large amount of money to purchase Zero Wing City's private houses and shops. Players might not be interested in these properties at all. If a guild town or city changed hands, any agreements with the previous owner would be null and void. Knowing this, who would possibly want to purchase land in an unstable city? Relax. Even if our situation is uncertain, what must be sold, will be, Shifeng said, chuckling. He did not bother to explain further. Aqua Rose was speechless. Although what Shifeng had said was true, selling such valuable properties at a discount wasn't worthwhile. Following which, Shifeng disconnected the call and had his team use a return scroll to teleport back to White River City. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose did as she had been told. Immediately, news of Zero Wing auctioning off its city's private houses and shops spread like wildfire throughout Star Moon Kingdom. Even the neighboring kingdoms and empires' major powers heard of the upcoming auction. Ha ha ha. So, Zero Wing is finally selling its city's private houses and shops. It seems that Zero Wing really can't hold on much longer. Zero Wing's selling their real estate now. Does Zero Wing take us for fools? When the various major powers saw Zero Wing's announcement, they laughed, ridiculing Zero Wing for falling so low. Zero Wing has finally hit its limit. Singular Burial could not help but laugh when he read the report from a subordinate. Unfortunately, it is too late. They might have found buyers had they chosen to sell the properties a few days ago, but now that Zero Wing's position in this war has become more uncertain, who would be foolish enough to buy the deeds? Notify our subordinates and have them increase their offensive against Zero Wing's members immediately. Also, spread a lie to the public, stating that we intend to attack Zero Wing City. I want to see just who actually attends Zero Wing's auction. Understood. Daybreak Fog nodded before leaving the guild leader's office. Although the various major powers understood that Zero Wing was approaching its end, many would be interested in attending the guild's auction. Aside from Zero Wing's in-house products, items were available from other players in Zero Wing's auctions. There was also the convenient option of bartering. Meanwhile, after exiting White River City's teleportation hall, Shifeng made his way to the library. Although he had already bound the Purple Thunder Flame to himself, he needed the help of a special magic array to fuse it with the Soul Fire, and only Charlene was capable of conjuring this magic array. At the same time, Shifeng sent his team to deliver the mana and Eternium ore they collected to the Candlelight trading firm before getting some rest. Aside from the massive amount of EXP they had earned while grinding demonic creatures in the Lost Town, they had gained a plentiful harvest of ores. Moreover, the closer they had gotten to the mysterious pit in the town's center, the more ores they had obtained. In total, they had collected over 15,000 pieces of mana ore and over 1,000 pieces of Eternium ore. When Melancholic Smile received the haul, she was dumbfounded. Due to the high demand for mana ore, prices for the ore continued to increase. Before Shifeng had left for the Boneless Land, mana ore had sold for 1 gold, 20 silver per piece. Now, prices had risen to 1 gold, 50 silver per piece. However, even at such a price, very few people were willing to sell their mana ore. Even a large guild like Zero Wing would be fortunate to purchase a few dozen pieces each day. Yet, Shifeng had returned with over 15,000 pieces of mana ore. Even if one robbed a super guild's warehouse, they wouldn't obtain such a bounty. Even if Zero Wing used all of the mana ore to craft mana charms, it would make a massive fortune. Meanwhile, Shifeng's request was simple: use 5,000 pieces of mana ore to forge mana charms and sell them. Not only would the mana charms fetch a high price, but there was also a solid market for them. With the money the guild earned, it could construct the mana tower in Zero Wing City. The largest problem when constructing a mana tower was the required materials. It required over 5,000 pieces of mana ore alone, in addition to plenty of other precious materials. Fortunately, the construction cost itself was relatively cheap, only 5,000 gold. Meanwhile, on the top floor of White River City's library. With Charlene's help, Shifeng attempted to merge the Purple Thunder Flame and the Soul Fire. It was far more difficult to merge the Tier 3 Purple Thunder Flame with the Soul Fire than it had been to merge the Tier 2 Ice Blue Devil Flame, since the former was more powerful. He needed more accurate control to wrap the Soul Fire around the Purple Thunder Flame. 1 attempt. 2 attempts. 3 attempts. With each subsequent attempt, Shifeng grew increasingly adept with the fusion process, so much so that he had improved his control over his own body and his environment. Shifeng was somewhat surprised at this. He had never thought that he could become stronger while trying to fuse the mysterious flames. He had thought that he had reached his limit and would have to break through to the domain realm to improve further. As Shifeng attempted his 26th fusion, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. You have gained rough control over the Soul Fire. You may now utilize the Soul Fire's intermediate abilities. Chapter 1634, Soul Fire's New Abilities. Chapter 1634, Soul Fire's New Abilities. Not even a Tier 3 mysterious flame is enough for me to gain full control of the Soul Fire. Shifeng was slightly surprised when he saw the system notification. Tier 3 mysterious flames were exceedingly rare in God's domain. As far as Shifeng knew, there should only be one Tier 3 mysterious flame in Star Moon Kingdom. When this mysterious flame had appeared in his previous life, practically every large guild in the kingdom had fought over it. Yet, despite fusing such a rare mysterious flame, he still didn't have full control of the Soul Fire. At this point, Shifeng began to wonder if there was a high chance that the Soul Fire was actually a Tier 4 mysterious flame. Shifeng had only ever heard of Tier 4 mysterious flames in God's domain's legends. The power of such a flame alone would be more than enough to injure a Tier 4 existence severely. With the Soul Fire's unique ability to burn a target's soul to nothing, it would be a terrifying weapon against both monsters and players. This was especially true for players. The immortal soul was the root of players' existence in God's domain. In NPC's eyes, players were only able to resurrect after death due to their immortal souls. If a player's immortal soul were extinguished, that player would be finished. However, it was extremely difficult to destroy a player's immortal soul. Hence, the Soul Fire should only be capable of damaging a player's immortal soul. Even so, it would be more than enough to prevent the target from logging into God's domain for some time. It would be a nightmare for any expert player. After all, in God's domain, one either improved or regressed. The game had countless players, and not being able to log in for several days would cause one to fall behind their rivals. Not bad. You've actually fused the Purple Thunder Flame so quickly. With your current control over the Soul Fire, you can weaken the Soul Chain's corrosion further. Locating that mysterious individual should become much easier, Charlene said, chuckling at Shifeng. However, you must still be careful. Although you've extended your time limit to 108 days after fusing with a Tier 3 mysterious flame, God's domain is very large. It might seem like a lot of time, but in reality, it isn't. It is best if you locate a few more Tier 3 mysterious flames during this time. That way, you'll gain better control over the Soul Fire. I only have 108 days. Shifeng was dumbfounded when he heard Charlene's warning. He had hoped to extend his time limit by a year or so after absorbing a Tier 3 mysterious flame, yet the system had only given him a small extension. And just as Charlene had said, locating that mysterious Tier 5 NPC would not be an easy task. He had no clues leading to the NPC either. He could only rely on the Soul Chain. Moreover, this was a legendary quest. In general, quests of this rank couldn't be completed within a short period. After pondering the situation for a moment, Shifeng calmed down. After all was said and done, the Purple Thunder Flame had delayed his deadline by quite a bit. At the very least, he would have more time to deal with his own matters. Following which, Shifeng tested the Soul Fire's power. Immediately, Shifeng's dark pupils were consumed by silver fire. His aura also changed abruptly. If others had felt relaxed around him before, he would now feel like an icy hell. Death and cold dominated his aura. Amazing. I only have a rough control over the Soul Fire now, yet it is already so powerful. When Shifeng examined his surroundings, he found that his environment had changed. Not only could he see the Soul Chain now, but he could also see Soul's wavelength. If he focused, he could even slow his perception of time. Shifeng was at a loss for words. Being able to view soul wavelengths allowed him to determine his target's strength. Now, he could see fast-moving objects far more clearly as long as he focused. Although this ability couldn't compare to a boost to one's physique, which allowed players to keep up with fast-moving objects and react far more quickly, improving one's physique was easier said than done. Just being able to slow his perception of time was astounding and would doubtlessly improve his combat power. I wonder what the Soul Fire will be capable of once I gain full control. After experiencing the Soul Fire's new abilities, Shifeng anticipated the day he could control it completely. He only had rough control of the Soul Fire, but it already offered such powerful abilities. If he had full control of the Soul Fire, the improvements the mysterious flame would offer would be even more impressive. Moreover, he'd be able to manifest the Soul Fire outside of his body as he could with the Ice Blue Devil Flame and Purple Thunder Flame, increasing his combat power further. After dealing with the Soul Fire, Shifeng made his way to the Candlelight trading firm and entered his personal special forging room. Although Aqua Rose had collected plenty of level 50 mysterious iron and secret silver equipment, Zipping and the others would only become as strong as the guild's ordinary experts once they equipped the items. It would be very difficult for them to change the war's overall situation. In fact, Shifeng had never hoped for anything game-changing by having Aqua Rose collect the level 50 equipment. He had only wanted to ensure that Zipping and the others wouldn't lag behind their peers regarding equipment once they caught up in levels. Even before leaving for the Boneless Land, he had tasked Melancholic Smile to purchase a large number of emeralds from Emerald City in preparation for forging the Magic Light sets. The Magic Light set wasn't like the Conqueror's armor, which required plenty of rare materials that weren't often available on the market. Emeralds were the main material required for forging the Magic Light set. Although emeralds were also a rare material, there was plenty available on the market. At this point, Zero Wing already possessed a huge stockpile of emeralds. As for the Mana Stone, another of the Magic Light set's core materials, Zero Wing had no lack of the stones. They could be produced indefinitely as long as the guild had enough magic crystals. Hence, producing the Magic Light set was much easier than the Conqueror's armor. Only, the cost was somewhat high, with each attempt costing 300 gold, 6 times the cost of forging the Conqueror's armor. Because of this, Shifeng had only dared to produce a few sets for Zero Wing's main force members. However, things had changed. Not only did he now have the dark gold ranked Black Steel insignia, but he also had the Tier 3 Purple Thunder Flame. His success rate for forging the fine gold ranked Magic Light set had risen to 55%, but that wasn't the most important factor. During his trip to the Boneless Land, he had acquired a large amount of Eternium ore, which he could use to make Magisteel ingots. Aside from increasing forging success rate, Magisteel ingots could increase fine gold weapons and equipment's basic attributes. After reaching his special forging room, Shifeng began to refine Eternium ore with the Purple Thunder Flame, transforming the ore into Magisteel ingots. The Purple Thunder Flame increased the Magisteel ingots' purity far more than an ordinary flame could. As a result, the Magisteel ingots he created offered a much greater boost to forging success rates. Originally, the Magisteel ingot only increased forging success rate by 5%, but the ingots Shifeng had created could increase his forging success rate by 7%. Very quickly, Shifeng smelted the 1,000 plus pieces of Eternium ore into 1,000 plus Magisteel ingots. Shifeng then rapidly refined the materials he needed to forge the Magic Light set equipment. Now that his control had improved and he had the help of the Purple Thunder Flame, his refining and forging speed had visibly increased. An hour later, a complete Magic Light set glistened before Shifeng's eyes, radiating a mesmerizing glow. This should be a success, right? Shifeng wondered as he gazed at the immaculate Magic Light set before him. He then clicked to inspect the set's attribute panel. Chapter 1635, Mana Tower constructed. Chapter 1635, Mana Tower constructed. Each attempt to forge the Magic Light set cost 300 gold, which meant that each failure also cost 300 gold. Not even super guilds would play around with so much money. If not for his considerably high success rate, Shifeng wouldn't have dared to attempt the set's mass production. When Shifeng clicked to inspect the Magic Light set's attribute panel, a system notification appeared. System, Magic Light set has been successfully forged. Forging proficiency increased by 15 points. Obtained 6 million EXP. Its attributes sure have improved considerably. Shifeng was delighted when he saw the set's attributes. Level 50 fine gold set equipment was best players could hope for at this stage of the game, since level 50 dark gold equipment only dropped from super large-scale team dungeons. Moreover, the drop rate wasn't 100%. With the inclusion of the Magisteel ingot, the fine gold ranked magic light set's basic attributes had received a 10% boost. Although it didn't seem like much, level 50 fine gold equipment generally offered over 100 points to each attribute. A 10% increase meant at least 10 more points. Meanwhile, the magic light set was a 6-piece set, offering 60 bonus points to each attribute. Furthermore, the Magisteel ingot improved every basic attribute. Overall, the 10% improvement was the equivalent of an additional piece of level 50 secret silver equipment. Aside from epic equipment and above, no equipment could rival the magic light set at this stage of the game. Unfortunately, epic items were extremely rare, and not even Guild's peak experts were guaranteed to wield one. If you let Zero Wings experts equip the magic light set, they'd definitely have an overwhelming advantage over other guilds' experts in basic attributes. Although the magic light set did not boost the wearer's combat standards, it offered far more destructive power than the Conqueror's armor's basic strength battle array. Rather than rely on superior combat standards to whittle down their enemies, Zero Wings experts could trample over their opponents by relying on the magic light set. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng began to forge the next magic light set. Very quickly, Shifeng went finished 3 more forging attempts. Among them, 1 was a complete failure, while 2 had succeeded. Shifeng's success rate even surprised him. As Shifeng was about to continue, Melancholic Smile contacted him. Guild leader, the mana tower you've requested has been built in Zero Wing City, but it needs too many magic crystals to operate every day. Should we activate it now? Melancholic Smile asked worriedly. Not only had they spent 5,000 gold to construct the mana tower, but they had also spent 5,000 pieces of mana Oregon. She had assumed that the mana tower would bring in additional income for Zero Wing City, but once it had been constructed, she had discovered that activating it cost 3,000 magic crystals, and its continued operation would cost 1,500 magic crystals per day. This was a significant expenditure to any guild, especially Zero Wing. Although the 4 Towers of Elements' teleportation function and Zero Wing's battle arenas had earned the guild some magic crystals, they couldn't afford to squander what they had. It's fine. Activate it, Shifeng said, chuckling. The mana tower was the symbol of a guild city. Zero Wing City could only be called a true guild city once it had a mana tower of its own. The mana tower increased the mana density in a city significantly. The 5 magic towers increased mana density wasn't even the equivalent to 1/3 of the increase a single mana tower provided. Moreover, more NPCs would only reside in a guild city once it had a mana tower. This was especially true for high-tiered NPCs since they had such strict mana density requirements. Right, once you've activated the mana tower, notify Aqua and have her raise the entrance fee to 60 copper. Increase the prices for the battle arena services by 30% as well, Shifeng instructed. Naturally, they needed to increase prices in various aspects with the increased mana density. After all, the rise would offer players more benefits. This, Melancholic Smile was stunned. It had not been easy to increase Zero Wing City's player population to 2 million. It might not be an issue if they increased the prices of the city's services a little, but players would definitely refuse such massive leaps. Zero Wing City's player traffic would doubtlessly decrease. Relax. Once the mana tower is active, Zero Wing City will be worth the price, Shifeng explained briefly. Of course, he understood Melancholic Smile's concerns. However, Melancholic Smile still had her doubts, but she still sent a subordinate to activate the mana tower. Following which, she notified Aqua Rose about the city's price increases. When Aqua Rose received the message, she even wondered if Shifeng were joking. Their 30 copper entrance fee had already elicited quite a few complaints, yet Shifeng wanted to double it. At this stage of the game, ordinary players only earn several silver coins per day after deducting repair fees. Including the expensive teleportation fee to travel to Zero Wing City, ordinary players would likely struggle to justify paying a 60 copper entrance fee. Furthermore, Zero Wing City wasn't located anywhere close to level 50 high-resource maps. Hence, the city's double EXP buff held little attraction to ordinary players. However, as Aqua Rose considered such issues, she felt the city's mana density rise rapidly. Even players who weren't sensitive to mana could clearly feel the increase. Naturally, they gained more mental clarity, as well. What's going on? Why do I feel so refreshed? Why has the city's mana density suddenly increased? What? The city's mana density has at least doubled. What did Zero Wing do? Quick, look. The mana density isn't the only thing that has increased. The accumulation rate for the double EXP buff has also risen. Now, we can accumulate 20% of the double EXP buff just by standing on the street for 24 hours. The players resting in Zero Wing City quickly discovered the new changes, and they all fell into heated discussions about them. Naturally, some of them published the changes to the official forums. At the same time, Zero Wing announced that it had increased Zero Wing City's entrance fee to 60 copper, which caused a huge commotion across Star Moon Kingdom. Crap. Is Zero Wing that desperate for money? They're charging 60 copper just to enter the city each time. That is daylight robbery. You can't put it like that. Right now, you can accumulate 20% of the double EXP buff just by standing on Zero Wing City's streets for 24 hours. That's just as effective as resting in a guild residence's 1-star private rooms. Do you know how much it costs to rent a private room in a guild? 60 copper is definitely cheap. Indeed. I just checked into a hotel in Zero Wing City, and the new benefits are simply amazing. Not only can I accumulate 30% of the double EXP buff in 24 hours, but I also got an energized buff that increases my maximum stamina by 10% for 4 hours. Moreover, the buff only takes effect after I leave the city. A 10% increase to maximum stamina for 4 hours. That's basically a free stamina potion. I've decided. I'm going to Zero Wing City to rest from now on. That's not the only thing that's changed. I've heard that Zero Wing City's teleportation function can cover a larger distance now. Now, you can teleport into the Orc Empire from Zero Wing City. At first, everyone had been disgruntled about the increased prices for Zero Wing City's services, but after learning about the new benefits the city offered, the number of players willing to rest in Zero Wing City skyrocketed. This was especially true for the adventurer teams that planned to explore the Orc Empire. While ordinary players might consider the teleportation function expensive, the fee was no problem for adventurer teams. To them, time was more important. With the amount of time they saved, they could defeat more bosses, complete more quests, and earn more contribution points. They could easily earn back their teleportation fees and more. In the end, Zero Wing City's player population shot from 2 million to 3 million in less than an hour after the guild implemented the new changes. At this point, the city even felt a little crowded. Chapter 1636, Zero Wing City's Rise. Chapter 1636, Zero Wing City's Rise. The rapid increase in Zero Wing City's player population had surprised Aqua Rose, who had assumed that it would decrease. Not only did the sudden addition of 1 million players bring in another 6,000 gold in entrance fees to Zero Wing City, but plenty of players also rushed to use the city's teleportation function. To save on teleportation fees, the various adventurer teams visiting Zero Wing City had also bought memberships for the teleportation services, each earning Zero Wing 20 magic crystals. In one short hour since the guild implemented the new changes to the city, over 4,000 players had bought a membership, bringing in over 80,000 magic crystals. There were even more players interested in teleporting to the Orc Empire. Due to the increased teleportation distance, non-members had to pay 30 silver for each maximum range teleportation. Even after deducting the teleportation cost, Zero Wing still earned 18 silver from each traveling player. During the past hour, over 6,000 non-members had teleported to the Orc Empire, handing over 1,000 gold to Zero Wing. Aqua Rose and Melancholic Smile were stupefied. Previously, Melancholic Smile had worried that they wouldn't be able to earn back the cost of the Mana Tower, but the city's teleportation function alone had raked in over 1,000 gold. The function alone made money faster than the Candlelight trading firm as a whole, not to mention the amount of magic crystals the service raked in. Moreover, the number of players using the teleportation function and registering for membership continued to increase. Guild leader, where did you obtain this Mana Tower? It is simply amazing. Aqua Rose said excitedly. With its profit speed, we can easily cover our daily expenditures. We won't have anything to fear, even if we continue to duke it out with Heaven's Burial for another 2 weeks. She had agonized over Zero Wing's lack of funds. The increased bounty had skyrocketed the guild's daily expenditures, but now, she didn't need to worry about the issue. This is only the beginning. Later, I'll store the weapons and equipment I've recently acquired in the guild warehouse. Everyone can trade for the items. Since our guild members have suffered so greatly, give our members in Star Moon Kingdom some bonus GCPs. Normal members get 50 points, elite members get 200 points, and core members get 500 points, Shifeng said, laughing. With the Mana Tower and the 4 Towers of Elements, Zero Wing City should have no problem reaching a player population of 5 million in the near future. At that time, the city should easily earn 30,000 gold off of entrance fees alone. Furthermore, there would be profit from the shop rentals, hotel fees, battle arena, and other revenue sources. Guild leader, won't it be a little much to give out so many GCPs at once? Aqua Rose could not help but gasp when Shifeng told her to award so many GCPs to their guild members. Although the value of Zero Wing's GCPs had recently decreased, each point was still worth nearly 20 copper. Giving normal members 50 GCPs would be the equivalent of handing them 10 silver each, elite members would receive 40 silver, and core members would receive 1 gold. Although this didn't seem like much, Zero Wing had a lot of members in Star Moon Kingdom. The total cost would easily reach more than 100,000 gold. Although players couldn't exchange these points for coins, there weren't many weapons and pieces of equipment in the guild warehouse available for purchase. It's fine. Our members have worked hard lately. Moreover, who says our guild doesn't have any weapons and equipment? Shifeng said, chuckling. However, he did not bother to explain further. Instead, he sent Yu Zipping a message, instructing him and the others to deposit the weapons and equipment they had obtained during their visit to the Boneless Land into the guild warehouse after disconnecting the call with Aqua Rose. They had obtained over 6,000 level 55 plus pieces of equipment from all of the demonic creatures they had slain in the Boneless Land. Although the majority of the items were bronze rank, there were several hundred pieces of mysterious iron equipment and dozens of pieces of secret silver equipment. Meanwhile, Shifeng's statement has confused Aqua Rose. Chapter 1637, Astronomical Auction. Chapter 1637, Astronomical Auction. Heaven's Burial wasn't the only guild caught off guard by Zero Wing's sudden transformation. All of the various large guilds were astonished. They hadn't realized that Zero Wing had such a solid foundation. This was especially true regarding the Mana Tower in Zero Wing City. The construction had skyrocketed the mana density in the city, making the already attractive city even more popular among players. Now, the various powers and players that had originally believed Zero Wing's downfall had been inevitable began to see a little hope for the guild. Who would have thought Zero Wing could still make such a move? Now, thanks to the Mana Tower, Zero Wing City's player population has gone through the ceiling. With this, the city's income will drastically increase. It seems that Heaven's Burial won't be able to wear Zero Wing down in a short amount of time. That's definitely true. Based on what I've heard, over 5,000 additional players have secured teleportation memberships in Zero Wing City since the guild implemented the new changes. Indeed. The number of orcs guarding the Orc Empire's borders continues to increase, and the borders are becoming even more difficult to cross. The distance is a huge problem as well. By teleporting straight into the Orc Empire's outer region from Zero Wing City, players can save over 10 hours of travel time. They won't have to worry about Orc patrol squads ambushing them either. The only problem is the expensive teleportation fee. It's not affordable for ordinary players like us. When discussing Zero Wing City's enhanced teleportation function, whether they were members of the various major powers or independent players, they all wore hungry expressions. At this point, the Orc Empire had become a gathering point for multiple kingdoms and 2 empires. However, the journey there was still a problem that plagued all of the players who wanted to visit the Orc Empire. Unlike Heaven's Burial's members, who could teleport to Ancient Rock City directly, other players had to travel for a minimum of 10 hours just to get from their respective countries to the Orc Empire's outer region. To make matters worse, they could only grind in the area for a limited time before they had to return to a city or town to rest due to the Empire's poor environment. Although there were guild towns and a guild city within the Orc Empire, these places had a limited number of hotels. There wasn't nearly enough accommodation for every player adventuring in the Orc Empire. This meant that the majority of the players visiting the Orc Empire were forced to return to their country's NPC cities to rest, spending another 10 or so hours to travel back to the Orc Empire. However, Zero Wing City had changed everything. Not only could players save precious time while traveling across the Orc Empire's borders, but they could also circle around the powerful Orc patrol squads and mutated orcs. Because of this, the number of players who gathered in Zero Wing City continued to increase. The only problem these players had to face was the money they'd have to spend to get to the Empire. There was also the matter of traveling to Zero Wing City. Although players could teleport to Zero Wing City via Evernight City, they still had to cross quite a distance to get from Starmoon City to Evernight City. Fortunately, this problem was practically negligible compared to the potential benefits of saving so much time during their travels. As a result, the various major powers and adventurer teams that hadn't initially been interested in Zero Wing's latest auction rushed to Stone Forest Town's Zero Wing auction house. Currently, despite there still being over an hour before the auction officially began, players already crowded into the spacious advanced auction house, many of which were members of the various large guilds. There were also plenty of well-known adventurer teams from the multiple kingdoms and 2 empires that neighbored the Orc Empire. Big Sis Aqua, more than 50,000 players have already arrived to participate in the auction. At this rate, we might even have 70,000 participants by the time the auction starts, Yaya said excitedly as she read the statistics report in her hands. Although Zero Wing was about to host its auction, not just anyone could take part. They had to fulfill certain conditions first. If one wished to enter the auction venue, they needed a minimum of 100 gold in their bags. If one wished to use the VIP rooms, then they had to have a minimum of 10,000 gold. The advanced auction house was even larger than the Candlelight trading firm in White River City. Not only could the largest auction hall house 100,000 people, but it also had 100 VIP rooms. Even so, all of the VIP rooms had been claimed. When Aqua Rose saw the statistics, she, too, was shocked. Even Super Guild's auctions had trouble attracting such a colossal crowd. Aqua Rose finally understood why Shifeng had said that this was only the beginning. With so many people contesting for Zero Wing City's private houses and shops, it would be strange if these properties did not fetch a high price. Following which, time passed quickly. Under Aqua Rose's guidance, Zero Wing's auction began smoothly. Although this was an impromptu auction, the available items were still of considerable quality, all of which were quite valuable to guilds and players. In fact, Zero Wing even intended to offer plenty of level 45 dark gold and level 50 secret silver equipment. Next up is our auction's first finale item, Zero Wing City's private houses. The first private house is located behind Zero Wing City's battle arena. The starting bid will be 1,500 gold, with each increment being no less than 50 gold. As Aqua Rose, the auction's host, finished speaking, the crowd stirred. The players in the VIP rooms, in particular, who had, thus far, shown no interest in the items for auction, stared longingly at the image on the large display above the stage. Crap. Zero Wing actually dares to ask for such a price. Even the private houses in major NPC cities don't cost 1,500 gold. Is Zero Wing that desperate for money? Many of the players present were shocked by the minimum bid Aqua Rose had stated. The private houses in NPC cities with player populations in the millions only sold for around 1,000 gold. A few of the private houses in strategic locations only sold for a little more than that. Meanwhile, players didn't have to worry about attacks or sieges in NPC cities, but it was a different story for a guild city. There was no telling when another major power would attempt to take the city for itself. Zero Wing was simply insane for trying to sell an unstable private house for such a high price. Honestly, even Aqua Rose considered the price somewhat high, but Shifeng had determined the minimum bid, 500 gold and not a coin lower. Hence, she had no choice but to go along with his wishes. However, after the auction's guests discussed the private houses in hushed tones, voices began to echo throughout the auction hall one after another as they began to place their bids. 1,600 gold. 1,700 gold. 1,800 gold. The rapidly increasing prices flabbergasted everyone. After a short moment, the price had risen to 2,200 gold. The bids only slowed after reaching this point. In the end, Remnant Cloud, the commander of the Fire Cloud Fox Adventurer team, won the first private house for 2,550 gold. Because of the winning bid, the spectating major powers envied Zero Wing. A single private house barely took up any of a city's land, yet Zero Wing had earned so much money from a single private house. At the same time, many of them pitted Remnant Cloud for his foolish decision. Although Zero Wing's situation had improved significantly, its chances of defeating Heaven's Burial were still slim. Purchasing a private house for so much money was foolish. However, as the various large guilds' upper echelons entertained such thoughts, the second private house sold for 2,700 gold. In total, Zero Wing had sold 15 private houses. Every one of them had sold, with the cheapest going for 2,450 gold and the most expensive earning 2,800 gold. The price could already rival that of high-potential lands in NPC cities. As for Zero Wing City's shops, the minimum bid was a frightening 5,000 gold, with each increment being no less than 100 gold. In the end, of the 5 shops that had sold, the cheapest sold for 7,800 gold, while the most expensive one had gone for 8,500 gold. During this single auction, Zero Wing had gained a net profit of more than 120,000 gold. When Aqua Rose saw the final numbers, she even wondered if she were dreaming. Guild leader, with this much money, we can purchase a large amount of level 45 equipment and replenish our warehouse. We can definitely help our guild members recover their full strength. Aqua Rose's eyes glistened when she saw the profits the auction had raked in. It had been a long time since she had seen so much money. No. Set the guild warehouse's replenishment aside for now. First, prioritize the NPC shop's construction, Shifeng said, shaking his head. He had never intended to sell Zero Wing's precious lands just to help the guild's members recover their lost weapons and equipment. Although the guild members' items were quite important, they paled in comparison to the NPC merchants' shops. NPC shops were the lifeblood of a guild city. Only after gaining NPC shops could a guild city start its endless cycle of development. I understand. I'll get to it immediately. Hearing Shifeng's words, Aqua Rose recalled the NPC merchants that had visited Zero Wing City to discuss business. Due to the guild's lack of funds, they had delayed the NPC shop's construction, but now that the guild had money to spare, it was indeed time to address the issue. Usually, only guilds had the opportunity to use such items. They couldn't simply be purchased with enough money. After acquiring these tools, players could take down powerful monsters they previously had to avoid. Guild leader, now that every NPC merchant has begun their shop's operation, shouldn't we purchase some of their products for ourselves? Although Aqua Rose had known about the NPC shop's products, she couldn't ignore the temptation now that they were available for purchase. Some of the rare items in these shops were even rare in capital cities' auction houses. If they purchased these items and sold them in Zero Wing's auction house, they'd make a huge profit. No need. Rather than trying to make a profit through resale, attracting more players to Zero Wing City is more important, Shifeng said, chuckling. He could sympathize with Aqua Rose's desire, but doing so would be penny-wise and pound-foolish. NPC shops were a guild city's lifeblood because they sold rare items every day, which attracted a constant stream of players to the city, increasing its popularity. The increased popularity would then help boost the city's various revenue sources. The resulting additional entry fees alone would outstrip the profits they could earn from reselling the NPC shop's items. After giving the matter some thought, Aqua Rose saw the reasoning in Shifeng's decision. Less than half an hour after the NPC shop's grand opening, they had attracted over 300,000 more players to Zero Wing City. That was more than 1,800 gold in entrance fees. As time passed, even more players would visit Zero Wing City, and at this rate, there was no need to resell items. Right, pull out some funds to purchase these materials. Buy as many of them as you can as long as the prices aren't more than 10% higher than market value. Once you have them, send all of the materials to me, Shifeng instructed after examining the materials he had left to forge the magic light set. Although he had Melancholic Smile gradually collect the necessary materials, the cost was simply too high. Overall, Melancholic Smile had only managed to purchase around 100 sets of materials for him. Now that Zero Wing had funds to spare, he needed as many materials as possible. Alright. I'll send someone to purchase them immediately. When Aqua Rose saw the list of materials Shifeng required, she was slightly astonished. However, now that Zero Wing City's income soared, she was confident in acquiring a large stock. Orc Empire, Ancient Rock City. The atmosphere in the guild leader's office in Heaven's Burial's residence was extraordinarily tense. What is going on with Zero Wing? Is some major corporation supporting it in secret? Singular Burial grumbled, greatly displeased with the latest status report on the rival guild. At the same time, he felt an immense pressure bear down on him. Not long ago, it had been obvious that Zero Wing was about to crumble. Yet, it was now full of vim and vigor. In fact, the guild was doing so well that it had even awarded over 100,000 gold in bonus GCPs. The large number of NPC shops that had recently risen in Zero Wing City was even more impressive. Singular Burial couldn't help but wonder if Zero Wing were somehow growing richer as the guild fought Heaven's Burial. Guild leader, our people are keeping a constant eye on this matter, but we haven't discovered any major corporation supporting Zero Wing from the shadows. Blackwater has also confirmed this, Daybreak Fog said, shaking her head as she answered Singular Burial with absolute certainty. We are sure that Zero Wing's recent income stems from Zero Wing City. Zero Wing City. Singular Burial's expression darkened when he read the statistics report on the guild city. Although he hated to acknowledge it, Zero Wing City had far more potential than he had expected. He had never thought that a guild city could develop so quickly, nearly surpassing Ancient Rock City. This is interesting. It would seem that Zero Wing's foundations are much sturdier than we imagined, Lei Jingyang, who currently sat nearby, commented, laughing. However, this is all they can accomplish. Since they refuse to surrender, can we now take action? Indeed. She found Heaven's Burial's actions truly disgusting, but if they didn't find a solution quickly, not only would Zero Wing's reputation plummet, but the guild's morale would also crumble. Does Heaven's Burial really think that Zero Wing is some helpless sheep? Since they want a fight, I'll give them a fight. Shi Feng sneered. Chapter 1642, Shocking All Sides. Chapter 1642, Shocking All Sides. As the players within the city watched the defensive magic array around ancient Rock City transform into particles of light and disappear, their expressions froze. How is this possible? What's going on here? Ancient Rock City's defensive magic array was destroyed. For a time, everyone struggled to process and accept the fact that the defensive magic array had actually broken. Although they were not particularly familiar with the strength of a city's defensive magic array, they knew that normal spells would be utterly useless against it. Even Tier 4 spells would barely have an effect. When Heaven's Burial had tried to capture ancient Rock City, the guild had spent many hours bombarding the city's defensive magic array. It had even employed Tier 4 mythic-ranked evil beasts to assault the barrier. Yet, this same, peerless magic array had crumbled under a single attack. It felt like some kind of joke. What did that person do? Is he some kind of high-tiered NPC? Curiosity filled ancient Rock City's players as they watched Shi Feng's cloaked figure. Meanwhile, the eyes of the various players from visiting superpowers within the city glowed as they watched the defensive magic array fall. A chance. This is our change. Quick. Notify the guild leader. Thus far, the superpowers hadn't given up on securing ancient Rock City for themselves. Its daily income was so astronomical that not even super guilds could ignore the temptation. However, nobody had been able to do anything against the city, its defenses were simply too powerful. Aside from the city's level 100 NPCs, the city's defensive magic array was impossible for these superpowers to overcome. They'd also have to contend with the defensive magic array protecting the city lord's mansion. Now, however, ancient Rock City's defensive magic array was gone. City's defensive magic arrays weren't like the defensive arrays players could summon with magic array scrolls. Once shattered, the protective barrier would need a long time to reform. Depending on the mana supply, forming another magic array could take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. During this time, ancient Rock City would be without the protection of a defensive magic array. Aside from the city's defensive structures, the various superpowers only had to overcome the NPCs defending the city. It was entirely possible to steal ancient Rock City out from under Heaven's Burial. The various superpowers members who rested in ancient Rock City immediately contacted their supervisors to report the city's situation. In almost no time, everyone had heard the news of ancient Rock City's defensive magic array shattering, causing quite a commotion among the various major powers in the Orc Empire. What? Someone has broken ancient Rock City's defensive magic array? How did they do it? Hurry up and look into it. We must know that person's identity. This is a good opportunity. Heaven's Burial has been relying on ancient Rock City to suppress us in the Orc Empire. Now that the city has lost its defensive magic array, we definitely have a chance of taking Heaven's Burial's place. Mobilize all of our members in the Orc Empire and tell them to gather in ancient Rock City. Call in all of our elite members grinding elsewhere, too. We can't let the other guilds get ahead of us. For a time, the various superpowers developing in the Orc Empire began to gather their forces in ancient Rock City. 24 hours was more than enough for their forces to make it to ancient Rock City. Without the defensive magic array in their path, they just needed to distract the NPC soldiers and destroy the City Lord's tablet, which was inside the City Lord's mansion. Once that was complete, the city would become ownerless, and a city order would appear. Chapter 1645, Primordial City. Chapter 1645, Primordial City. Shurfeng wasn't the only player to receive the system notification. Players in the Orc Empire and those in the neighboring kingdoms and empires were also notified. A new expansion pack. Someone triggered an expansion pack related to the Primordial Divine Ruin. How lucky! What's going on? What's this, Primordial City? The system notification stirred players in the various kingdoms and empires into an uproar. Although the new expansion pack this time did not require players to log off, every new expansion pack meant new opportunities. Every time a new expansion pack launched, the status quo in God's domain would change, some guilds and players would rise, while others would fall. Meanwhile, this expansion pack was connected to the highly popular Primordial Divine Ruin, which even the various superpowers struggled to monopolize. It was clear that this expansion pack would be extraordinary. If one took advantage of this expansion pack properly, they could even experience a meteoric rise, becoming famous throughout God's domain. After all, the same thing had already happened multiple times thus far. Everyone immediately looked into this Primordial City the system announcement had mentioned. As soon as they had, though, they were stunned by what they had found. According to God's domain's historical records, Primordial City had been a legendary city before the Great Destruction. Nobody knew exactly what kind of place this city was. They only knew that players had to travel through a specific teleportation gate to reach the Primordial City. This teleportation gate could be found throughout the continent of God's domain. According to the legends, the Primordial City was even grander than Blackwing City. In fact, it offered even more benefits than the Holy City of Titan. Countless opportunities awaited players, including hidden classes and combination skills that had been lost in time. After learning more about Primordial City, the potential benefits tempted many top adventurer teams. They began to partner with other teams to explore the Primordial Divine Ruin. Since the various large guilds had monopolized the ruin since it had appeared, adventurer teams and independent players hadn't dared to consider exploring it. The risks far outweighed the gains. Although it was possible to obtain combat techniques within the Primordial Divine Ruin, doing so was incredibly difficult. At the very least, no lone adventurer team had any hope of survival in the ruin. It would need the strength of multiple adventurer teams. Unfortunately, even if multiple teams worked together, they'd have to address the problem of loot. No one wanted to take a loss, and because of this, it was unlikely that multiple adventurer teams would cooperate. Most importantly, a single adventurer team's strength was insignificant in the eyes of the various superpowers. Not even first-rate guilds would take top adventurer teams seriously. However, the situation had changed, and their only goal now was entry into the Primordial City. In that case, it was definitely possible that the various top adventurer teams could work together without incident. As for how many players each team got into the Primordial City, that would depend on them. The various superpowers were now focused on Heaven's Burial's ancient rock city, and even if they were interested in the Primordial City, they'd only be able to spare a portion of their forces to raid the ruin. This gave the top adventurer teams a greater chance of entering the Primordial Divine Ruin and proceeding towards the Primordial City. Guild Leader, the Primordial City is amazing. Aqua Rose was astonished when she read the report on the new city. Not only was the Primordial City's foundations stronger than those of the Holy City of Titan, but it was also a holy ground for players who wanted to grow stronger. When did Zero Wing gain another batch of experts? For this operation, Shi Feng did not have his team members wear black cloaks. Hence, both their levels and equipment were exposed for all to see. At this stage of the game, only an extremely small number of players had managed to reach level 50. First-rate guilds only had around 30 to 40 level 50 players, and the various superpowers only had 300 to 500. Yet, every player in the team of nearly 2,000 that Zero Wing had dispatched to the ruin was level 50 or higher. Some were even level 52. This was simply unbelievable. Moreover, Zero Wing's members wore dazzling equipment. The 30 unfamiliar players at the lead even wore the same fine gold set equipment. The aura they radiated was akin to a ferocious beast that had just been released from its cage. Wearing the magic light sets, which were even stronger than level 50 dark gold equipment, Zipping and the others' basic attributes were even higher than a Lord-ranked monster of the same level. A Lord-ranked monster might not be a tough opponent for the players in the Primordial Divine Ruin, but it was a different story if it were a player with the attributes of such a monster. Such a player could easily solo an elite party. Even the superpowers commander-level individuals felt an immense pressure wafting from Zipping's group. Although their equipment was considered top-notch in God's domain, their basic attributes were nowhere near a level 50 lords. Suddenly, the various superpowers members saw Zero Wing's players in a new light. They were all powerhouses, and they knew what this aura and pressure represented. Although these factors couldn't be used to determine a player's strength, they did hint at a player's general combat standards. Just how much strength has Zero Wing hidden? It already introduced another 100 refinement realm experts, and now it's revealed so many experts with such intense auras. Could some superpower really be supporting Zero Wing in secret? Purple Jade's eyes widened when she saw the magic light sets Zipping and the other players wore. Currently, she had numerous pieces of level 50 fine gold equipment on her, and the weakest piece she had was level 45 dark gold rank. In addition, she carried an epic weapon and a piece of epic equipment. Overall, her lineup was among the best in the game right now. Yet, Zipping and his companions' basic attributes seemed higher than hers. Her basic attributes ranked among the top in the secret pavilion. What kind of power was the secret pavilion? It was an organization which only a small number of super guilds could compare to, yet Zero Wing had just revealed 30 never-before-seen experts with even higher attributes. The situation was simply ridiculous. It's no wonder why Black Flame dared to lead a team here. It seems that he came prepared. Yuan Tiexin's mouth twitched slightly as he watched Shi Feng. Level 50 fine gold set equipment, huh? In his opinion, the only possible reason that Zipping's group had higher basic attributes than his and Purple Jade's was their level 50 fine gold set equipment. There was no other way that these players could surpass them. Level 50 fine gold set equipment? Purple Jade couldn't help her surprise. How is that possible? Even our guild has only collected 2 of such sets so far. How could Zero Wing possibly collect 30 sets? Level 50 equipment was already extremely difficult to gather, let alone level 50 fine gold set equipment. Even after investing tons of manpower and resources, the secret pavilion had only obtained 2 level 50 fine gold sets. What means did Zero Wing, a guild that was many times weaker than the secret pavilion, possibly employ to obtain 30 such sets? Don't forget that Black Flame is a master forger. It is very likely that he crafted the level 50 fine gold sets, Yuan Tiexin said, his expression turning somber. Truthfully, even he struggled to believe it.